Good morning and welcome to RoxomTV News. We start this morning with breaking news as the United States has attacked one of Iran's oil hubs. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. The Bitcoin price is around $68,000 this morning, and off the coast of Iran, U.S. forces have carried out strikes on military targets across Kharg Island early Tuesday, hitting sites similar to previous operations but avoiding key energy infrastructure. That matters because Kharg Island is one of Iran's main oil export hubs, so what wasn't hit is just as important as what was. And this comes as President Donald Trump posted, and I quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." Then, almost in the same breath, he floated the idea of something revolutionarily wonderful happening if leadership in Iran changes. That's the tone heading into the 8 p.m. Eastern deadline, which he set yesterday as the final cutoff for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Take a look.
They have till tomorrow. Now we'll see what happens. I can tell you they're negotiating, we think, in good faith. We're going to find out. We're getting the help of some incredible countries that want this to be ended because it affects them also. A lot of people are affected by this. But we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And after that, they're going to have no bridges. They're going to have no power plants.
Trump reiterated the United States plans to decimate Iranian infrastructure if that doesn't happen, and Iran isn't backing down. In fact, they rejected the United States ceasefire proposal and instead sent its own 10-point plan through Pakistan, demanding reparations and long-term control over Hormuz traffic, and called the United States proposal unrealistic. Trump is calling this progress, but not enough. So now we're staring at a deadline where both sides are still far apart. And when the language escalates this quickly, the risk isn't just what gets said, it's what happens if someone decides to follow through. All right, joining us this morning to help make sense of it all, a gentleman who spends a lot of time thinking about how all of this fits together beneath the surface. We're talking capital flows, incentives, and where things are actually heading. The editor of Bitcoin Think, Beautyon, Akin, welcome back to the show. It's so great to have you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me in such an inauspicious moment.
It is. We've got a lot to talk about this morning, Akin, so let's just get into it. We heard the remarks from President Trump. So when you zoom out and you look at this whole situation we've been in now for what's like a month and change, you've got actual strikes happening, but also this very public deadline and negotiation window looming in the background. It almost feels kind of like two different games are being played at once. So, Akin, how do you make sense of what's actually driving the decision-making here right now? What is your beat on where we are in this Middle Eastern conflict?
Well, is it possible to make sense out of things that don't make any sense? This is the first question you have to ask yourself. And secondly, if there's no clear objective to the strikes that are being done, if there's no off-ramp, a realistic off-ramp, the question is, why is it being done? What is the purpose of destroying civilian infrastructure if it's not going to add to the stopping of this war? And anybody who's paying attention knows that the Iranian citizenry are not minded to give up. I've just heard right now that millions of them are flocking to the bridges and other infrastructure that have been threatened so that they can form basically human shields against this bombing. And of course, that's not going to be effective in any way, shape, or form. And so the question is the U.S. administration willing to slaughter all these people for no reason at all? It doesn't make any sense. And realistically, going forward, if there is an exchange of some kind of neutron bomb or something like that, it's completely irrational to believe that there isn't going to be a blowback of some kind of retaliatory response. And so to do this, you have to be absolutely sure that what you're doing, first of all, is justified, and second, that it's legal. It has to be legal. There has to be a sufficient pretext to be doing things like this. And in absentia of such a pretext, you're playing with very, very, very dangerous forces. And I don't think anybody's taking into account the other nuclear-armed countries that have all taken the side of Iran. has apparently just now said that they're going to hit Tel Aviv with nuclear weapons if Iran is attacked. The Chinese have been very inscrutable as normal, haven't said anything about it, but I would be very surprised if they're not going to take a very firm stance on this, and Russia also. So this is not, the world isn't a video game. The world isn't a clip out of Top Gun. There are many moving parts to this, and there are other people, all of whom are real and not just pictures on screens, who are deeply offended by what's happening, outraged by it, and who are not going to just sit down and allow one country to do X, Y, or Z. And I think the people who are most patriotic, American patriots, are raising the right kinds of questions about the thinking behind this whole anti-Iranian movement. I think it's a very, very big mistake. It's a bad mistake. And a lot more can be achieved through peace and talking with people than wantonly murdering them. Iranians are not animals. You cannot say that people are animals. These are highly sophisticated, very civilized people, and in the main, very peaceful. There's a lot of geopolitical maneuvering going on in that area where people are trying to protect themselves as is their right by different kinds of means, whether it's making other regimes fall that are openly against them. You have to take all of these things into account. The thing that is not acceptable is irrational behavior, is maneuvers that don't achieve a stated end. And I don't think that the obliteration of Iran, irradiation of Iran with neutron bombs is acceptable by any civilized standard, by any civilized person. So this might be another bit of bluster from Donald John Trump. And full disclosure, I, like many people, were completely for his economic policies and his anti-war stance, but it seems that the whole thing is on its head. So this has to stop. It has to stop. If there's a nuclear exchange, it will mean America being ostracized for many, many, many years, and deservedly so, because if this country cannot control the most awesome power on earth, well, then there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a problem, and the Chinese and the Russians and everybody else cannot just sit by and let a sovereign country like Iran be destroyed like this. And so, once again, people are not caricatures. People are not imaginary. They're all real. You cannot threaten people like this without them having a reaction, a visceral one at that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you made a lot of good points there, Keenan. There's a lot to unpack with the situation. First, as you mentioned, none of this really seemingly makes any sense. We were kind of going with this rhetoric we've heard from Netanyahu for 30 years. Iran has nuclear weapons that could be available any day. He's literally been saying that. He's on videos and saying that since 1991. And then you hear Trump literally repeating that same rhetoric during his press conference just a few days ago. So that doesn't make sense. The United States is now bringing all of their military forces, it seems like, to the Middle East, which I'm sure is music to the ears of China and Russia. And like you said, there's no clear out for this, because right now we're bombing Kharg Island, which we know is a very important station for oil production. And so what do you think is going on? I mean, do you see any end game here for the United States? Because it feels like Trump has painted himself into a corner. The Iranian people look very entrenched, and it doesn't seem like they'll be giving up any time soon. Yet we're hearing this rhetoric from the president saying this war could be over tomorrow. They could have some kind of miracle resolution if there is in fact a regime change. What do you make when you're hearing the rhetoric from our president saying this will be over soon, but then we just bombed Kharg Island today? What do you make of that? Do we not know what we're doing, or is there maybe something else at play that I'm not understanding here? What is your read on the rhetoric and then what's actually happening on the ground here, Akeem?
Well, first of all, who is we? This is not a we thing. Mm-hmm. This is a U.S. administration thing. They are doing this unilaterally. They're not doing it on behalf of the American people. That's got to be said absolutely. The majority of Americans are not for this unilateral, extra legal attacks on sovereign countries. 100%. And also, a lot of things are being said, like Iran is out of ammunition, their navy is destroyed, their air force is destroyed. But clearly that's not true, because apparently they have massive underground bases that are underneath literal mountains that they've been building for 30 years, and they are armed to the teeth. They are not going to give up either. They've just canceled all diplomatic channels where any line of communication could have been used. That's all been just cut off in the last couple of hours. So these people are not going to give up. And I don't know if you've ever seen, I mean, this is the problem with American culture. It's extremely powerful. Have you seen the movie War Games? In the end of that movie,
a long time ago.
Yes, in the end of that movie, the computer, which is about to launch a thermonuclear war because it thinks that the simulation is real, it's made to play tic-tac-toe. And then it realizes itself, because it's artificially intelligent, that the winning move is not to play. And I think that applies to this absolutely perfectly. The winning move is to declare victory. You're willing to lie about everything else. You can lie about having a total victory over Iran. You can show the satellite pictures that everything's been destroyed on the surface, and you can declare victory. You can avoid this ridiculous idea of nuclear war with Iran, bring nuclear weapons on them. You can avoid the destruction of Israel, which the North Koreans have said that they're going to do absolutely if any nuclear weapons fall on Iran. And everybody wins. Everybody gets to back out of this nonsense, and the diplomacy can restart, and then you can take the long road to either influencing or not influencing Iran. Not that influencing Iran is anybody's business, but for the Iranians. So this is what has to happen. Somebody has to be the bigger man, and they have to back down, declare victory, and wash this whole thing up. Trump has admitted that he was been deceived over the Iranian population and what would be the result of a decapitation attack. He decapitated the Iranian government, and it's only made them stronger. So obviously, the administration has underestimated the Iranian character. These are not a bunch of pushovers. These are not a bunch of losers. This is an Aryan nation of extremely intelligent, highly trained, and super motivated people who cannot be cowed, who cannot be threatened. And so all of the tactics that you use on other kinds of countries run by other kinds of people will not work with Iran. This is a fact, and everybody is obliged to face the facts of reality. And America is more important as an intact nation without its infrastructure destroyed than other nations. I'm biased in that way, sorry. So I think the preservation of America is of the paramount importance. Obviously, its prestige in the world has been completely destroyed over this. But that can be rebuilt. New presidents will come in, new administrations will come in, and that can be rebuilt. But the Twin Towers could not be rebuilt. A destroyed New York City that's been nuked cannot, come back out of nothing. So America has to act into the people who run America currently have to behave in a way that is designed to keep America alive. And the president cannot launch a nuclear attack unilaterally by himself. He needs the military to do it. And those military men have sworn an oath to defend the United States of America and uphold its Constitution. And what's happening now is obviously not in the best interest of the United States. And so this object, this mythical object called the football, which is used to launch nuclear weapons, should be withheld from the president if he is actually minded to push the button later today, like he's been threatening. This should be absolutely off the table. We know that many people in the administration and in the military have resigned over this maverick who is threatening everybody. And so we can only hope that the people who fly the planes, the people who have the football, the people who actually control the means of destruction are going to obey their oaths and not lead America over the cliff, and maybe the whole world also.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there, Akeem. First thing you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is you said like the Iranians have been preparing for this for like 30 years. As I mentioned earlier, like this has been rhetoric that has been familiar to them. So it's surprising to me that we went in there thinking this was going to be easy when they've been preparing for this for 30 years. So this was never going to be easy, right? And then you also talk about Trump and the button, right? We've already seen pretty much Trump declare a war that was not approved by Congress, which would in turn make this not technically a war. But Trump is, has this sycophantic crew around him that seems obliged to kind of, for a lot of them, do whatever he wants. So with that being said, and seeing how he's basically declared war when Congress has not, does that in any way make you nervous about him finding ways to go around needing the military for the button? Because it seems like with Trump, it's just he inches a little further, takes a little more until he's at that next place, and then he takes more there. Are you concerned about that at all? Because I think we can all agree any kind of nuclear weapons being even threatened is a terrible scenario, right?
It is a terrible scenario, and the good thing about this is the following: we know that Iran has been very heavily bombed. People have been killed without just cause. It's been absolutely terrible, but Iran hasn't been shut down despite all of this bombing, and so it is possible that this launch of nuclear weapons can be stopped by the people who physically do the work to do it. It takes airplanes to go and deliver them. It takes submarines to launch them. The people who actually press the button, the people who are very, very well trained, will not press the button unless they get the order to do so. And if the order doesn't come down from the top, it cannot happen. So there are checks and balances in place that can stop it. The main one should be the oath of office that these people take, the oath of service. And so if they do follow their oaths, this exchange cannot happen. And then we can go back and say, what is it actually that we need to do? How can we exit from this debacle, from this morass? And America has backed down and ceased and desisted from doing very, very terrible things. You've seen the footage, no doubt, of the last helicopters leaving from Vietnam. So it is possible for America to enter into a conflict, which is not a good conflict, and then to come out of it without having total victory. And America can survive this. People forget about it, and life goes on. But nuclear exchange is a different thing, because other countries have these nuclear weapons, other countries who have long-term beef with the United States. And all it will take for an irrevocable disaster to happen is one of these weapons landing on any major American city. And so if this can be avoided, it should be avoided now. And the people who are actually in control of the nuclear infrastructure need to resolve and determine amongst themselves that this they will not do, because it's illegal, it's unnecessary, and frankly, the Iranians don't deserve this at all.
No.
Do they have their own way of living? Do they have their own philosophy and their own religion? Of course they do. But that's not a pretext for wanton destruction. America must be able to live with people who have different philosophies, the main one being China, for one example. And so we don't go to war with countries just because we don't agree with them. And the way for America to dominate is actually how it's done through the 20th century, through the culture. American culture is extremely powerful, and also its ingenuity. And so with these two things, it's possible to totally conquer countries just through the television, just through the music, just through everything else. Violence is a retrograde step. It's a barbaric step, and it's unnecessary. And civilized people don't resort to this sort of problem solving. Unfortunately, when you have people who in charge who are, and I don't know how to say it in a polite way, who are not up to the task.
Yeah, not equipped.
then then that's where you have the problem. Also, there's clearly a problem in the way that the military can be deployed without consensus.
Yeah.
If nuclear weapons can be deployed at the behest of a single man without any kind of vote, without any kind of check or balance, this is completely unacceptable, because all it takes is for one madman, not the case of Donald Trump, but another madman, a future madman, to come in, be elected, and then cause the entire end of the world because he wakes up or gets out of the bed, the wrong side of the base, in a bad mood. And so I am absolutely flabbergasted that there is no check and balance on this so-called football and pressing this button. There must be. It's unacceptable that a single country can unilaterally launch Armageddon at the behest of one man. It doesn't make any sense. What if there was a situation where you had another president, not this president because he's teetotal, another president who was drunk out of his mind, and he wants to launch a nuclear war because he's drunk? Are you telling me that the military will salute, bring this football to him, and allow him to launch a nuclear war because he's drunk?
Yeah,
this is essentially what they're saying. There is no consensus. There's no check and balance on the release of these nuclear weapons because he can unilaterally do them. This is completely insane. It's totally insane. And once this is over, the United States people and its government need to look very, very seriously at the protocols that precede the launch of nuclear weapons and even war itself.
I mean, this situation is just growing more and more dire by the minute, right, Akin? I mean, we just saw him say that a whole civilization will die tonight in a press conference. And something you mentioned earlier that I want to come back to, you talked about the move that would essentially solve this is everybody just backing away and finding some diplomatic means to move forward with. But we do know Donald Trump pretty much started this. And he's got the midterms coming up not too far from now, and he needs to rally the base and get people in support of him. If he were to back up right now, I don't know how there's any world he could call this a win. And we know Trump is going to frame it as a win no matter what. You saw yesterday, he had the press conference talking about they saved the airman from the F-15 that was down, and he made it sound like some huge mission. It was this huge win for the United States. But really, let's be real, that was a mission that should have never happened like this entire war. So do you realistically see a path forward where this war could, or this conflict, I should say, could end peacefully? Because I just don't see Trump backing out of this. He's already so embedded in this situation. I don't see how he can come out looking good unless Iran surrenders to all of his demands, but that doesn't look like it's happening. So where do you realistically see this heading? Because I'd be shocked if Trump just said, we're backing away, that's the right move. That doesn't seem on brand for him. What do you think?
Well, the idea that he's doing this because the midterms are coming up is the most fanciful nonsense imaginable. If there's a nuclear war, elections won't matter. There won't be any midterms. There won't be anything. There won't be anything like this. The whole world will be in a state of absolute chaos. And so, to use this as sort of a psychological or any other kind of play to ensure the outcome of a future election is beyond stupid. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So if this is the calculation that he's making, and he's threatening a nuclear exchange in order to help sway a future election, this is irresponsible. It's highly irresponsible. And the people who are in charge of nations are not at liberty to be irresponsible like this, especially since everybody knows he can unilaterally launch a nuclear attack. And the perception of him being unhinged, whether it's true or not, is firmly in place. And so it's not beyond the realm of possibility to most people that he could actually do this, not understanding what the side effects of a nuclear exchange would actually be. And so I'm baffled by this idea that it's something to do with the midterms and losing the sway in the Senate and the Congress. Doesn't make any sense at all. And as for this man who was rescued, apparently it cost $350 million to get this man back. Now, obviously, no American wants to see American soldiers die for any reason. That goes without saying. But the way to do this is to not have sent them in the first place. Yes, these people have no business going over there, bombing the infrastructure of a sovereign country that is not threatened the United States directly. It's as simple as that. And as for this nonsense of them being close to a nuclear weapon, as you said, the prime minister of that country said that Iran is close to a nuclear weapon always 10 days or 36 hours or whatever it is, going into the United Nations and making these ridiculous demonstrations. It's all nonsense. And we know for a fact that somebody who in the Western mentality is even more unhinged than the Iranians supposedly are, who already has nuclear weapons. That's the Mr. Kim Jong-un of the North Korea. They already have nuclear weapons. They haven't launched them against anybody else. Do you really think that if Iran managed to assemble nuclear weapons, that they would be worse than the North Korea as a threat to the United States? It's just, the whole thing is illogical. So this is what's also very worrying. If the governments of the West are working on an illogical basis like this, what else are they wrong about? And what else are they doing on a lower level that's completely irrational? It's very worrying. And if we get out of this without being destroyed, I think people need to look very carefully at the unbelievable amount of power that's given to these people that's unchecked.
Yeah, and just to clarify here, I wasn't really saying that I feel like he's threatening nuclear weapons to gain favor in the midterms. All I'm saying is, with the midterms ahead, and clearly there's been a lot of disapproval from both sides of the aisle regarding this war, I wonder how much the midterms will influence what ultimately happens next. Because like you said, I think the best thing is back away, find some diplomatic means, and I think that would definitely help raise his popularity amongst both bases right now when they're both plummeting to close to all-time lows. But we'll see. We do seemingly have a madman at the helm right now, and we're all praying this ends in peaceful measures. And I want to continue on to this next story, as this one relates very much to what we're talking about, Akin. So stay with me and I'll bring it back in just a second. Because the biggest pushback that we've been seeing to Trump's war posture right now isn't coming from the Democrats. It's actually coming from his own side. You see, Tucker Carlson delivered a very sharp and very public break with the administration's approach. He reminded the president that he is not above any other human life, directly challenging both the tone and moral framing of the conflict. Take a look.
Who do you think you are? You're tweeting out the F word on Easter morning? You'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. So obviously you're mocking the religion of Iran. Okay. If you seek a religious war, that's a good idea. But by the way, no decent person mocks other people's religions. You may have a problem with the theology. Presumably you do if it's not your religion, and you can explain what that is. But to mock other people's faith is to mock the idea of faith itself. And we should never mock that, because at its core is the acknowledgement that we are not in charge of the universe. We did not build it. We won't be here at the end of it. We can destroy life. We cannot create it because we are not God.
Now, like him or not, Carlson isn't just another commentator. He's the most influential voice in the populist right media ecosystem right now. And Tucker is now framing this war as a moral failure, not a strategic one. And when that message hits the same audience that helped put Trump in office, it changes the political math here. Because losing support at the base level doesn't just create noise, it raises the real cost of going further. All right, we're bringing Akin back. Akin, what's interesting here is the pushback isn't coming just from the opposition like we normally see. It's coming from within Trump's own base, which we know is fervent and rabid for him. So when you see someone like a Tucker Carlson step out like this, how significant is that to you from a political alignment standpoint, that we're actually seeing people that were out here supporting Trump finally push back? Because during his tenure in office, that hasn't been something you've really seen a lot from his side of the aisle.
Well, I think the idea here is that it's not actually political alignment. Most of the people who supported Trump, and I was one of them, supported him because he was against exactly what he's doing now. He's against all these brother wars, all this nonsense that he's now engaged in, because it's first of all, it's illegal and doesn't serve America's purpose. And so I think that, it's not surprising if people supported Trump on a moral and philosophical level, they should now turn against it, because they're not for Trump because it's Trump. They're for Trump because he is saying things that they agree with. He has a policy program that they agree with. And funnily enough, it was working. All of the economic indicators were turning around because he's actually working in a way that's good for the American economy. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that many of the MAGA people have now turned against Trump because they're philosophically against this kind of action. They don't have memories like a goldfish where they think that the history only goes back 3 weeks. They remember things like the Vietnam War, the Afghanistan incursion, all of these other things, which are manifestly, provably bad for America, and also this WMD business with Iraq. There were no WMDs there. The whole thing was a complete debacle. And so Trump has promised that he would not do these things again. Everybody believed it. He said exactly the right things. And here we are in 2026 with him stabbing everybody in the back. Now, what the reasons are for that, only he knows. But what we can say for sure is that this whole event was specifically excluded from a possibility if you went with Trump. And everybody believed him. And he stabbed everybody in the back.
Let me ask you this, Akeem. As someone who said they voted for Trump in the most recent election, I don't really care if people voted for. I consider myself pretty middle, but I like to get an understanding for why people think and do the way they do. So my question for you is, we've had Trump in office before. He has shown us pretty clearly he doesn't necessarily have anyone but his own people and himself's best interest in mind. He's been caught in so many lies, both in his past term and this one. Aside from the rhetoric that you liked with him coming into, running for president the second time, what made you believe him? Because I just don't believe a darn thing out of that guy's mouth. I haven't for close than a decade now. He's a very fun personality. I think he's one of the most unintentionally funny people in the world, but I don't trust a thing that he says. So based on his record, what made you feel comfortable voting for him I understand this rhetoric, but how did you really feel comfortable believing him? I guess would be my question, because I feel like a lot of people are in that same boat right now.
Well, it's very important to say, first of all, I didn't vote for him.
You didn't, so you supported him. Thank you for clarifying.
I support him. In politics, anybody who is an adult doesn't expect politicians to tell the truth. Politicians lie as just a part of what they do. And so it's only the results that you should judge people by, not by what they say. Don't trust what people say, trust what they do. And all of Trump's policies, like removing the Department of Education, shutting down the bureaucracy, to an extent the Doge thing where they tried to get rid of waste, all of these things are what the real Americans are for. The federal government is far too big. And of course, the most important one that he promised that he probably won't be able to do now is the abolition of the IRS, which is another thing that Bitcoiners are interested in, because it goes back to the disaster of the Federal Reserve dollar, which actually isn't a real dollar at all. And so all of these things are, because he started to actually do them, showed that supporting him was correct, because he actually started to do them. And so some things he could do, sometimes some things he didn't have enough time to do, or the obstacles were put in front of him, like the Supreme Court putting obstacles in front of him. So we don't expect perfection from this man. What we expect is not to launch a mass murder campaign against Iran, which is exactly what he campaigned against. All the other things, reforming America, making it more efficient, cutting out the waste, going back to a constitutional basis. And there was even talk from this man that before any new laws could be put onto the statute books, 2 or 3 laws had to be removed. And so obviously the direction of travel, and this is the direction of travel situation, but the direction of travel was correct, which was much better than any of the other presidents you could name, going right back to Ford, you name it. And so this man was demonstrably better than the other administrators.
His rhetoric was better, right? I mean, like, as that thing, do you think that's going to change how people, like, the trust that they have going forward? Because, like, go ahead, sorry.
It's not a question of the rhetoric. It's a question of
Okay.
what he actually got done.
He started his presidency and launched a shitcoin.
Well, this is once again, I don't think it's adult to expect perfection from anybody, especially a politician. And so obviously he's going to do things that are wrong, that are crazy. Very, very few people understand Bitcoin. And so to expect him to understand Bitcoin or either of his sons is just not, it's not reasonable. It's a direction. This is a direction of travel situation where if the direction of travel is correct, we should support that, because the way that the American government was running was not only unsustainable, but is clearly anti-American. And so on that basis, to an extent, you'd have to just hold your nose and accept that this is the best possible president out of all possible presidents that you could select. And so I think that's reasonable. But this warmongering, this attacking other countries on the behalf of other countries, this is absolutely unacceptable. And so is kidnapping for president of another country, by the way. Extrajudicial, that's illegal. You might not like this man. You might not think he's a good president or runs his country properly. It's nothing to do with America. You have no business kidnapping people. That's lawlessness. And so it's also lawlessness to blow up ships in the middle of the water because they're carrying things that are currently illegal. For many years in the United States, there was prohibition where alcohol running was illegal. Are you telling me that if alcohol was illegal, that you would blow up the ships that were importing beer into America? It doesn't make any sense. It's illegal. It's immoral. It's completely wrong. There's a drug problem in the United States because there is a culture problem in the United States. And so blowing up these boats is just is showing off. It's a kind of vulgar showing off. It's very, very wrong. And all of these signs, all of these things were, so first of all, not supported by me. Kidnapping presidents and blowing up drug running boats is not supported by me and under any circumstances. It's completely wrong. But what's happening with Iran is on another scale, because it's going to drag everybody on Earth into it. If there's a nuclear exchange, it's going to drag everybody into it. Everybody's going to be affected by it. And it's just a bridge too far. It's just too much, too much. And so that's my full position on it. I'm not for America minding other people's business or interdicting drugs in international waters and doing all this other kinds of regime change. And I've been very consistent about this. And you can go back to my early blog writing, back to the 2000s, where I've been completely against all of this. America should withdraw from being the policeman of the world. It should not try and impose its ideas on other people, its ways of living. They complain that the Iranian people are made to follow the Sharia law and cover themselves up. That's got nothing to do with America. It's nothing to do with you. So it's very important that people know their lane, stay in their lane, and stop trying to tell other people how to live, because what we end up with is exactly what you're seeing today. One day you're going to face somebody who's not willing to be bullied and who's not willing to negotiate. People are saying that the art of negotiation, you should read this book. Look, some people are not willing to negotiate away their faith or their belief in themselves or their culture. They actually believe completely that they're correct. And now you've seen millions of them. 17 million people apparently have just signed up to join the Iranian military. These people believe that they're correct. And you can't dissuade them by showing them movies and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't work like that. American culture is good for America. It's not good for Iranians. It's not good for the Saudis. These people have their own cultures. They're very happy with their own cultures. And if you want to deal with them in any way, you have to deal with them on the basis of equality. Now, for people in the West, they don't think that these other cultures are equal to their own. That's perfectly fine. But when you deal with other people, especially when it comes to diplomacy and business, you have to behave as if they're equal. And this is, there's been a very carefully designed culture of diplomacy, which is built up over generations, that govern how different people from different countries manage to get along. And one of its excrescences is the United Nations, which has its own problems. But what that body does is acknowledge that people have differences, but we can put those differences aside so that we can at least talk to each other and we're not killing each other. And abandoning this is uncivilized. By definition, it's uncivilized. What America is doing to Iran is uncivilized. And their ambitions to make a homemade nuclear weapon, first of all, it's completely understandable. Look at North Korea. Nobody's talking about attacking North Korea. And North Korea is no way near as sophisticated as Iran is. Are you seriously saying that the Iranians should not have a nuclear weapon, should not have the security of this weapon, even if they never use it, so that their infrastructure remains intact? And of course, since they haven't got it, what's happened? They've been not only decimated, but the person who is responsible for it is boasting that they've been decimated. And now he's threatening to eliminate them, to send them back to the Stone Age and all this other kind of vulgar talk. Of course, people are going to want to have nuclear weapons so they can avoid what's just happened to Iran. And so very important to, first of all, be moderate in the way that you talk about things, to understand that other people are not animals because they don't eat hot dogs and hamburgers, and they need to be treated with respect. If you don't treat them with respect, you're going to end up in a situation like this where they're going to harden and harden until they will literally come out in their tens of millions, go to the places where they know are going to be bombed and invite death, because that's how much they love their culture. That's how much they want to, they'd rather die than change.
Yeah. And to your point, that's why I don't see there's any way that we're quote unquote winning this conflict, because there's two different things going on. We're fighting this for reasons that really none of us quite understand, probably Israel, and they're fighting this for their own survival. Those are two entirely different mindsets, and that is a war that I don't think we're going to be winning. You brought up Vietnam. That's what it's feeling like a lot right now to me, but we'll see how this plays out. The temperature is certainly getting turned up here. And I want to talk a little bit about the ramifications and other parts of the world, not just what's going on in the Middle East. So stay tuned with me here. Akin, I'm going to bring you right back in a second after I read this story, because every year Wall Street pays attention to Jamie Dimon's shareholder letter. But this one, this year, reads less like a forecast and more like a warning. You see, the JP Morgan CEO used his annual letter to focus almost entirely on one word: war. Specifically, the Iran conflict, which he now sees as the single biggest threat to global stability, ahead of Ukraine, China, and literally everything else on the board. His concern isn't just geopolitical, it's economic, and it builds step by step, because the risk he lays out is stagflation. Oil and commodity prices spike because of the war, which pushes inflation higher. That inflation sticks, which forces central banks to keep interest rates elevated. Those higher interest rates start dragging down asset prices, slowing the economy, and eventually tipping it into a recession. Except this isn't a normal recession. Prices keep rising at the same time growth is falling, which is exactly the scenario that policymakers have the hardest time fixing. Dimon called gradually rising inflation the skunk at the party, which is a pretty clean way of describing what's happening right now. Markets just had one of their best weeks since November, largely driven by optimism around a ceasefire. But if that ceasefire doesn't actually materialize, or if oil supply doesn't recover quickly, the underlying pressures he's describing don't go away. In fact, they accelerate. And that's what makes this letter stand out. It isn't just the warning, it's the contradiction inside of it. Dimon defends the broader geopolitical approach while simultaneously laying out how it could damage the economy he's responsible for navigating. So when the CEO of the largest bank in the United States tells you the biggest risk to your portfolio is a war already underway, that is not theory. That is positioning. All right, we're bringing Akin back. Akin, Diamond's letter feels a little different this year. It's not just cautious, but it's almost contradictory. So when you read something like that from Jamie Dimon, how do you interpret a message where he's both defending the broader approach and also warning it could seriously damage the economy? What did you read from his letter? I'd love to know.
Well, first of all, Jamie Dimon has a very long record of being wrong about Bitcoin. And so people who are so completely wrong about something like Bitcoin always gives me pause when they say things about other stuff. And if anyone thinks that stagflation is going to be the end result of a nuclear exchange between Iran and the United States and Israel and North Korea and Israel, if you think stagflation is the worst problem that everybody's facing, you've got a problem, a very, very serious problem, because this is more important than economic indicators, indices, and everything else. This is something that's unprecedented in human history, and it's the idea that stagflation is at top of anyone's mind shows a profound lack of seriousness and a profound failure to understand what events mean for the future, which of course ties in perfectly to not understanding Bitcoin and why it's so important. And so I'm flabbergasted. Well, probably not too surprised, but it's still shocking that anybody can see what's going on. Anyone can see the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House and be worried about stagflation. It's just absolutely incredible. And I don't think people have the imagination to understand what a total cessation of all economic activity would mean. They just cannot conceive of it because it's a picture that's far too big. It is, once again, similarly, they can't understand the wholesale replacement of fiat currency because the scale of such a thing is just too big. And we know that such events can happen because the record industry, the book publishing industry and the movie industry have been greatly affected by this internet that's has a net layer over everybody's lives. And so the replacement of money by Bitcoin is a similar level of global civilizational change that obviously some people don't want to see. And I don't know if you heard, but in the last couple of hours, the Iranian government has threatened to cut one of the main undersea internet cables that routes traffic all over the globe. So exactly. So let's say that this nuclear exchange doesn't happen, but the Iranians, who are very capable of doing things like this, start to cut these undersea cables. This will have a profound effect on the way people do everything because everything's done over the internet, and these cables are the things that are routing the messages from country to country. And so I think stagflation is something we can think about once this conflict has been declared won by the White House and things go back to quote unquote normal. I just don't think it's serious to talk like this at this date. It's April the 7th, 2026. Stagflation is the least of our problems and the least of anything that people should be talking about. Obviously, this newsletter was published or written probably before this whole nonsense started. But maybe I don't know who's writing it or what their schedule is. But right now, this is not the news that is important. This is an existential crisis that the whole world is in, and that's where the focus should be. Should the football be handed over to this man and basically cause a disaster on an unprecedented scale?
Yeah. One quick thing I would like to say about Jamie Dimon. I believe Chase has actually acquiesced and they are providing crypto services for, I think, starting this year. So, but I do agree with you. I have a little bit of pause for anybody that's going to come out and say negative things about Bitcoin without really understanding that. Also, though, I don't think our president was always on board with Bitcoin. Didn't he really only become interested in it when it became debanked? When he became debanked, I should say?
Maybe. It's possible. Certainly, what's interesting is when people are exposed to a new idea and their immediate reaction is to dismiss it without looking at it carefully, without seeing how people are using it, without taking a look at it at all, they just immediately poo-poo it. And that, to me, is an indication of somebody who doesn't think.
Agreed.
And also, waiting for something to happen to you in order to believe that a tool is useful is also the sign of a person who is not thinking.
Yeah.
There are people on Earth who do not have access to banking, for example, and these people can make use of Bitcoin in a way that's life-changing. So are we really going to believe that these supposedly intelligent people cannot conceive of anybody other than New Yorkers or Californians, that these are the only people on Earth, and people in Nigeria and Tunisia and all these other places who don't have bank accounts, somehow they're not even real, that they can never make something like Bitcoin? And so when people talk like this, it's an indication that they're unthinking, parochial, navel-gazing people who have no idea that the world is even round, or that other people in other countries are real. And so whenever I hear these people and saying, well, now they're all of a sudden saying that, well, maybe we could do something with quote unquote crypto, it just shows they really haven't even understood it. They're just going along with it because it's too embarrassing for them to not go along with it. And I predicted that this would happen. That once Bitcoin became ubiquitous, all of these people who used to, and there's if you've been in Bitcoin long enough, you know the names of these people. They all would go along with it because it's the ridiculous people are now the people who are against Bitcoin. And so the most important thing for people who want to see Bitcoin succeed is to not fight against the Jamie Dimons and all these people, but to spread Bitcoin to people who need it, make it as useful as possible, as usable as possible, and then all of a sudden the whole world will change.
Yeah, Keen, I like where your head is at with that, and I think you're totally right. But as you and I both know, there's a lot of dummies out there, and we're actually going to talk about one of them in our next story here. So hang with me, and I'll bring you back in just a second. Because every few months, gang, someone resurfaces the Bitcoin is going to zero argument. And somehow it always sounds confident, scientific, and completely disconnected from how the system actually works. This time, it's coming out from economist Stephen Keen, who went on the Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett and made the claim outright. He didn't hedge it, didn't soften it, just said, yes, Bitcoin is going to zero.
I wanted to come back to something you actually said earlier. You talked about Bitcoin briefly.
Yeah.
I've heard you say that you think Bitcoin's going to zero.
Yeah.
Okay, this is worrying. I think I have some Bitcoin. You're an economist.
Yeah.
You're saying that Bitcoin is going to zero. Why?
Ultimately, because of its reliance upon energy. I mean, you know Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert. Have you met them at all?
No.
They were sort of the original proselytizers for Bitcoin, and they're now living in, I think, El Salvador, which has adopted Bitcoin as a form of currency. When they told me about Bitcoin, I could have bought it for £1 of Bitcoin, which would have been, I would have been maybe wealthier than you if I'd done that. The reason I didn't was they explained that the way that the public ledger is kept safe is that it takes too much energy to break it. So each transaction requires 10 minutes of computer processing time globally, by the looks of it, to actually create an extra Bitcoin. And that means it's too expensive for somebody to try to break the ledger. That means it's got a huge requirement for energy use. And I believe, knowing what I know from climate scientists, that at some point we're going to realize we're using far too much energy on the planet. We've got to cut the energy consumption. And the two easiest things to cut out to reduce energy consumption are cryptocurrencies and international travel.
Akin, I would love to get your reaction to this guy. I think energy is kind of the most important thing right now. Everybody knows it. We're trying to figure out ways to create more. Do you think there's any basis in this loon, what he's saying here? I'd love to get your thoughts.
2013 wants its arguments back. I mean, honestly, how can there be anybody left in 2026 who thinks like this, especially since all the information about how Bitcoin actually works is available to everybody? Somebody told me somewhere that it uses a lot of energy. Excuse me. If this is the sort of thinking, if this is the depth of thinking that a so-called economist puts into an incredibly powerful and important subject and topic like Bitcoin, what else are they wrong about?
Yeah.
And no, he doesn't have anything to say about the limit of 21 million Bitcoin. I think it's probably a safe bet that this man is a Keynesian of some kind. And that's actually his underlying objection to it, because he is under the belief, the mistaken belief, that the supply of money needs to increase along with the size of the economy. The supply of money needs to increase in line with the size of the economy. And so this fundamental mistake about the role of money in an economy is very, very widespread. The books that teach the correct view, which is the Austrian view, sometimes even appear in the libraries of these halls of learning. And so we've heard all these arguments before. They've been refuted 100 times, and there will always be somebody who doesn't accept the basic proposition of reality, never mind Bitcoin math. And so it doesn't surprise me that this man thinks this. He has a vested interest in not accepting the truth, because his whole career, if he's a Keynesian, is completely wedded to the idea that the money supply should be increased. And so Bitcoin is an affront to him. It's an affront, and it's an anathema to him. And so I think what's most important is that the majority of people who are involved in Bitcoin understand these arguments, have heard them all before. They literally loll at them, and they just carry on their work. They're spreading the wallets, spreading the infrastructure, and then all of a sudden one day, this old man will have to live in a world where Bitcoin is the only money. And going back to this nonsense of the energy use, Friends of the Earth tried to mount a campaign saying that Bitcoin uses, quote unquote, too much energy. Well, actually, if you look at the amount of money, the amount of electricity that's expended on Bitcoin, it's actually very reasonable for what you get in return. And if we take this back to the debacle which is happening in Iran, imagine if Bitcoin is the only money on earth, and it is not possible to steal money, to steal the spending power by printing money out of thin air to buy arms and to do all of this nonsense. Then all of a sudden the military industrial complex becomes impossible, because in order to run it, you'd have to tax people at 200, 300% of their income. And so this puts a natural constraint on the ability of these nation states to wage war. Now imagine what the value of that is compared to the value of electricity that's put into running Bitcoin. And remember, the people who run the Bitcoin network are private individuals paying for running of the network themselves. It's not coming from the government. So the idea that you can invoke that, the idea that Bitcoin costs too much to run is absurd, because all the people who are running it are doing it for their own interest, for their own benefit. It's not coming from the state. So this argument it's an unintelligent argument. And if he's hasn't looked into it, it's an argument, it's an ignorant argument. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, Akin, I've talked to hundreds of Bitcoiners, people that are CEOs, CIOs that are deeply integrated in this space. And it's the same story every time. I was a traditional finance guy, but then I learned about Bitcoin and now I'm not. So it's like the writing is very much on the wall. This is clearly another individual that has not done the research, and he unfortunately will end up paying for that in one way or another. And boy, wouldn't it be great to not be able to afford this war? If we had Bitcoin, we couldn't just print money to have this war. It really solves a lot of things like you mentioned. And I really appreciate you bringing that to the attention of our audience, because not everybody has seen, I know they do a really good job of explaining it in God Bless Bitcoin, and you did a really really great job of kind of summarizing that very important part that people don't think about with Bitcoin, maybe because they just don't know and they haven't been exposed to that information yet. And you, Akin, are one of the people really doing God's work and helping tell the masses about why Bitcoin is important and where the world is going forward. So we really appreciate having you on the show again. It's always a great time getting to chat. I'm sure there's at least a few people in our audience that aren't done. They say, we want more of what Akin is talking about. So for those in our audience out there, where can I send them so they can get more information on what you're up to, what hot takes you got, and whatever you're working on? Because the people want to know.
Well, I'm running a company called azte.co, Azteco, and our mission is to bring Bitcoin to as many people on Earth as possible. We are about to launch some distributions which will bring us to literally almost 1 billion people, wow, which is a very, very important part of spreading Bitcoin to the world so they can actually have an economic effect, dampening effect on all this bad behavior that's going on. And if they search for me on the X platform, I'm sort of famous for being Beautyon on X, where I often lose my temper to my shame. So I've been trying to do much better. And so that's basically it. And on my X profile, you can see a link to my Medium articles, which go back to 2010, where I've predicted many, many of the things that have happened in Bitcoin. I've been very prescient and very good at that. I have to blow my own trumpet, and it's a fact. I'm very, very good at it. So I just hope that this absolute insanity doesn't actually end our ability to talk to each other. The undersea cables don't get cut. I can come and speak to your audience again, speak to you again. Let's pray that that's the case.
Absolutely. And, Akin, I really see you as being one of the really talented and great, influencers of the Bitcoin space. And I really appreciate what you're doing and sharing your knowledge and insights with me and our audience today. We really do appreciate it. And it's been so fun having you back on the show. We'll have to do it again sometimes. I always love hearing your takes and what you got to say. So I want to thank you for joining us. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your week, my friend. It's been a blast.
Same to you, and thanks for having me. It's been great.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Akin. All right, gang, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but we'll be back with the second hour of today's show. But before we do, here's a look at what's happening across the globe.
Yesterday, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump hosted the annual White House Easter egg roll, welcoming children and families to the South Lawn for the traditional celebration. But the festivities were quickly overshadowed by the escalating crisis with Iran. Between egg rolls and whistles, the president stepped aside to address reporters and delivered some of his most direct warnings yet.
Let me just tell you, very fair question. The Iranian people, when they don't hear bombs go off, they're upset. They want to hear bombs because they want to be free. And the only reason they're not out protesting, you know that, is because they were informed that if they protest, like the wrestler and his friends, if they protest, they will be shot immediately. And that's an edict, that's in writing. If they protest, if they go out in the streets, they will be immediately shot. They don't have guns. We sent some guns, but the group that was supposed to give, which I said would happen to my people, I said it, I called it exactly. We sent guns, a lot of guns. They were supposed to go to the people so they could fight back against these thugs. You know what happened? The people that they sent them to kept them because they said, what a beautiful gun, I think I'll keep it. So I'm very upset with a certain group of people, and they're going to pay a big price for that. But the Iranian people will fight back as soon as they know they're not going to be shot and as soon as they can get weapons.
The conflict, now in its 6th week, has already claimed over 3,400 lives across the Middle East, sent oil prices surging past $114 a barrel, and shut down the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil normally flows. The president acknowledged that Iran has submitted a 10-point proposal through Pakistani mediators, calling it a significant step, but not enough. Meanwhile, China is weighing in on the crisis. At a press briefing in Beijing today, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning called on all parties to seize what she described as an opportunity for peace. China expressed support for Pakistan's role as mediator between Washington and Tehran and said it stands ready to play what it called a constructive role in ending the conflict. The statement comes as Iran's 10-point response to the U.S. peace framework remains on the table, with Tehran rejecting the proposed 45-day ceasefire and instead demanding a permanent end to the war, reconstruction aid, and the lifting of international sanctions. Away from the tensions on Earth, history was being made in space. Yesterday, the 4 astronauts aboard NASA's Artemis 2 mission flew by the moon, reaching farther from Earth than any human in over 56 years, breaking a record held since Apollo 13. Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialist Christina Koch and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen cruised roughly 4,000 miles above the lunar surface, witnessing the far side of the moon as it eclipsed a distant, basketball-sized Earth behind them.
Also, an interesting part of the discussion that I heard between Reed and Jeremy is that from Galishko to Grimaldi, there are 2 dark features there that look like commas.
Love the descriptions. You're definitely looking odd up there. Appreciate seeing the training being implemented.
Oh, I floated away from the speaker. Say it again, please.
The moment brought the crew to tears. Yesterday, President Trump held a formal press briefing at the White House where he went further than any of his previous warnings.
But we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And after that, they're going to have no bridges. They're going to have no power plants.
The president laid out in detail what he said was a military plan to destroy every bridge and every power plant in Iran within 4 hours, with complete demolition by midnight if no deal is reached by his 8 p.m. Eastern deadline tonight. Trump said the entire country could be, in his words, taken out in one night, but added he hopes it doesn't come to that.
In Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to. We don't want that to happen. We may even get involved with helping them rebuild their nation. And you know what? If that's the case, the last thing we want to do is start with power plants, which are among the most expensive thing, and bridges. You saw the bridge went. We were very close to a deal. And then I got a call from Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, and JD saying, I think they're breaking the deal. I said, tell them that's okay. Don't worry about it. But tell them to look out their window and watch. And within 45 minutes, I gave the order to knock out the biggest bridge. I gave the order, knock out the biggest bridge in, I believe, the Middle East, but the biggest bridge in Iran. And within 10 minutes after I gave that order, that bridge was over.
Iran was quick to fire back. Hours after Trump's threats, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a defiant response. Spokesman Ibrahim Zolfikari dismissed the president's warnings as baseless threats from a delusional leader, saying they stem from a military deadlock and repeated American defeats. Zolfikari vowed that what he called offensive and crushing operations against U.S. and Israeli forces would continue, and warned Washington that every action it takes will only add to its humiliation in the region.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. We continue today's show with this morning's breaking news as off the coast of Iran, U.S. forces have carried out strikes on military targets across Kharg Island early Tuesday, hitting sites similar to previous operations but avoiding key energy infrastructure. That matters because Kharg Island is one of Iran's main oil export hubs. So what wasn't hit is just as important as ultimately what was. And this comes as President Trump posted, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." Then almost in the same breath, he floated the idea of something revolutionarily wonderful happening if leadership in Iran changes. That's the tone heading into the 8 p.m. Eastern deadline, which he set yesterday as the final cutoff for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Take a look.
They have till tomorrow. Now we'll see what happens. I can tell you they're negotiating, we think, in good faith. We're going to find out. We're getting the help of some incredible countries that want this to be ended because it affects them also. A lot of people are affected by this. But we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And after that, they're going to have no bridges. They're going to have no power plants.
Trump reiterated the U.S. plans to decimate Iranian infrastructure if that doesn't happen. And Iran, well, they're not backing down. In fact, they rejected the United States ceasefire proposal and instead sent its own 10-point plan through Pakistan, demanding reparations and long-term control over Hormuz traffic, and called the U.S. proposal unrealistic. Trump is calling this progress, but not enough. So now we're staring at a deadline where both sides are still fall apart. And when the language escalates this quickly, the risk isn't what just gets said, it's what happens if someone decides to follow through. Well, while politicians are talking tough, the money side of the world is doing something very different. You see, across global markets, traders are essentially frozen heading into today's Hormuz deadline. Futures are slightly down. Oil keeps climbing with Brent above $111 and WTI past $113. And gas in the United States is now sitting at an average price of $4.11 nationally after being under $3 before the conflict began. In Europe, Italy has started rationing jet fuel at airports, and several Asian countries are already tightening energy usage. Singapore's foreign minister said what most traders are already thinking, that markets still aren't fully pricing in the worst-case scenario. And right now, nobody is making big bets in either direction. There's nothing solid to trade on except a deadline and a president who hasn't followed through on previous ones. So instead of reacting, markets are hovering in place. Not pricing a deal, not pricing a war, just pricing the hours before what feels like a coin flip. All right, joining me this morning to talk about this stories and others, some friends of the program. They're over from the Savannah Group. So let's give a welcome to Chase Palmieri and Sanjay Mavinkurve. Everybody, guys, welcome back to the show. I'm so glad to have you on. How are you both doing this morning?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, guys, pleasure is all ours. And we got a lot to talk about today, guys. This might be the beginning of the end, but I certainly hope not. So I'm hoping you guys can talk me off a ledge here. Because right now, things are looking pretty dicey, right? I mean, you look at this situation and it's interesting because nothing is really moving in any kind of decisive way. Traders don't seem to be leaning in. They're not aggressively hedging. They're just kind of sitting there. So Sanjay, let's start with you. How are you reading this situation? Does this feel like calm or does this feel like a market that just doesn't know what it's allowed to actually believe yet? I'd love to get your read.
You can never really tell with President Trump. I do feel like we're at the point now where there's been so much jostling in the rhetoric, so much back and forth that it almost seems like the market's desensitized in a way.
Yeah.
When the president of the United States says something so so drastic as an entire civilization will end tonight.
Yeah.
And the market doesn't move that much. I mean, I think we're about, less than 1% off for the day. That tells me that there's probably a bit of sort of Trump rhetoric exhaustion, and the market's waiting to see where this goes.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sanjay. And Chase, I'd love to get your read too. Is just the market just kind of like Trump's full of SHIT right now, or what are you making of this?
Yeah, I think I align with what Jack Mallers has been saying for the past few weeks, which is that we're probably nowhere near the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, given that it's one of the remaining and strongest cards left in the hand of the Iranian regime. And not to mention the fact that public threats through Truth Social, such as what Sanjay is referring to, do not seem like the part of a well-negotiated peace treaty in the background.
Yeah, it's really hard to know what's going on. Rhetoric is saying one thing, but then bombs are still falling every morning I turn on the news. So nobody really knows what to believe. And guys, when we have a setup like this, we have this hard deadline for 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. There's a lot of geopolitical noise, obviously, and seemingly no clear signal. So Sanjay, what are professionals that you think actually waiting before they act again right now? Is it confirmation of some kind of outcome or just enough clarity to justify taking risks again? What do you think that traders are looking for right now before they decide to act?
Yeah, it just sort of feels like there's been just so much rhetoric and so many bold sort of here's what's going to happen, so many deadlines, so many ultimatums, each one so far getting pushed back. It seems to me like folks are just waiting to see what actually happens, and are just placing less weight on every utterance from the president.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Go ahead, Chase, please.
yeah, I'm sitting on a little bit of dry powder myself right now, and I'm looking
Hmm.
at that 8 p.m. Eastern timeframe, and I'm asking myself, is right now the moment to buy, or do I expect the peace treaty to not take effect and for market to crash a bit further and buy at a bit further of a discount? I think if you're a trader, and I know you're covering that story today, you're probably looking at this and saying, well, it's unlikely that a peace treaty is settled today. Definitely unlikely that the Strait of Hormuz is actually a safe passage in the next week or two. And you're probably thinking, okay, I either want to wait to see if we get a leg further down, or this is so unknown, I'm going to wait and be a momentum trader and wait till I see us start moving back up again, even if I miss that first 5 or 10% up.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of those situations where it's like you can kind of make the case to go either way right now, but it might be like trying to catch a falling knife because we just don't know how far this bottom can go with all this uncertainty in the mix. And, guys, this doesn't just stay contained to the markets themselves. This affects Americans in a lot of other ways, right? Like we're talking higher energy costs start kind of leaking into everything. So, Sanjay, when you look at this, where do you think the average person is actually starting to feel it first outside of the gas pump? Because right now we associate this as gas is costing $4 a gallon story, but it really could mean a lot more than that down the line. So where do you think the average American could be feeling it outside of the gas pump next if this conflict continues on the way it has been?
I think we haven't felt it as bad as we will if the conflict keeps going. It takes a very long time for ships to get from there to wherever they're going. These oil tankers move at a snail's pace. And
Yeah.
so I think folks don't fully appreciate yet just how bad this can get, which makes me wonder, how surely Trump knows that if things get worse, they can get worse quickly and for a lot longer. And with midterms coming up, surely he knows that that's not, I mean, the Republicans were already not, faring well even before the strikes on Iran. It really makes me wonder whether he's got something up his sleeve, or whether he really is just, taking this as it goes. Whatever happens, happens. Midterms be damned.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm hoping he's got something up his sleeve, but right now this feels more like the guy who's painted himself into a very dangerous corner. But I don't know. And Chase, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on, you know, Trump right now is there a way he can get out of this that still looks like victory? Like yesterday, we saw him give a 30-minute press conference about the amazing extraction of that fighter. So glad he's safe. But again, that probably cost tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. So what do you think is like an actual end game for him here? Because as Sanjay mentioned, midterms are around the corner. And he needs to get that approval rating up. It's near all-time lows. So I'm not asking you to predict the future per se, but what do you think is a realistic solution for this where Trump could gain some of his base back before midterms? Because things are not looking good for him right now. But I'd love to get your read.
Yeah, well, I guess I would say that regime change seems very unlikely without boots on the ground, and boots on the ground seems incredibly unlikely given the US public's interest in boots on the ground in Iran, or I should say lack of interest in doing so. So I don't see regime change as one of the cards he can turn over at the flop and say, yep, we did it. Came here and we did what we wanted to do. And I also just don't see how the Strait of Hormuz is going to be open until Iran has milked it for what it's worth. And I kind of mentioned Jack Mallers at the top. He's really highlighted this issue that while the US is attacking Iran's infrastructure and using violence and physical force, Iran seems to be using the Strait of Hormuz as a way to affect the US economy and basically financial warfare. And that's something that they can drag out for a lot longer. We can't keep depleting our own military. We've already done so much in the war in Ukraine as well. So it just seems to me that the only solution here is going to be a tail tucked between the legs and hoping that after doing so, Iran will allow passage through the strait. But even so, now that they've taken control of that and they're charging prices and allowing certain nations and certain friendly players to move through the strait, that might just become the new norm.
Yeah. Yeah. We're hoping that we decide to back down, but just knowing our current president, that just doesn't seem like something I would expect from him, given he does declare victory pretty much no matter what. So I'm hoping they're right. I think we're all looking for a diplomatic and peaceful solution to this war that nobody's really asked for. But we're in the throes of it right now, guys. So we'll see how it turns out. I appreciate you guys discussing this story with me. And now for this next one, I'd like to wrangle this back to the Bitcoin of it all. So guys, stay tuned. I'm going to bring it back in just a second because you are just the two I wanted to talk about with this story. Because for this next one, this is actually something we did touch on last time we had the guys on the show. But having them back on, we felt it was worth bringing back up again because it sits right in their world. Now, in the United States, mortgage giant Fannie Mae, which sits right at the center of the housing market, is preparing to allow borrowers to count Bitcoin and certain crypto assets as reserves when applying for a home loan. Now, that might sound like a small tweak, but it changes a very specific behavior. You see, according to the Wall Street Journal, borrowers may no longer need to sell their Bitcoin to qualify, which means avoiding taxes and maintaining upside exposure at the same time. Now, behind the scenes, Coinbase is working with Better Home and Finance to structure these loans, allowing borrowers to pledge Bitcoin or USDC as part of their down payment while still holding onto the asset itself. And importantly, these are still standard mortgages, so there are no margin calls tied to Bitcoin's price swings as long as payments are being made. And that's the key distinction here, because it removes one of the biggest risks that typically comes with using volatile assets as collateral. But the real significance here isn't the mechanics of the loan, it's the institution behind it. You see, Fannie Mae plays a central role in underwriting U.S. mortgages, which means when it changes its criteria, the rest of the system tends to follow. And that's where the shift starts to become structural. This is how adoption happens in real time, not through hype cycles or price spikes, but through slow integration into systems that people are already using. And once Bitcoin can be used to help secure something as fundamental as a home, the way people think about it starts to change. It stops being just an investment and starts functioning more like collateral, which is a pretty core property of money. And once that shift takes hold, it's a very hard one to reverse. Because at that point, Bitcoin isn't just sitting outside the system anymore, it's being absorbed into it. All right, I'm bringing the guys back. Gentlemen, so this is something we touched on last month, but now it's actually happening with Fannie Mae working alongside Coinbase and Better. How big of a deal is it that Bitcoin is officially being accepted as collateral, not just talked about in theory? Chase, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, I guess there's really two pieces to pull out of this story. One is the recognition from Fannie Mae that Bitcoin is collateral and can serve as credit for the home buyer. That is phenomenal news. That is a huge testament to what many Bitcoiners believe, which is that Bitcoin represents this idea of pristine collateral, a better form of collateral than any other, and that it should be recognized in a person's net worth when applying for a mortgage. That is one thing. That is the really good news. The other is this particular product, which I'm personally not a huge fan of, because the way that it actually works is you're taking out two loans. You're taking one loan out against your Bitcoin or your USDC. And so then you're also taking out the mortgage. So you're actually taking out two mortgages and in order to hold on to that Bitcoin. So it's something that you could kind of tape together on your own. If you really wanted, you could just go borrow against your Bitcoin and use that as a down payment. So the product itself to me isn't that revolutionary, and it increases your interest expense for a home buyer, but it is the recognition from Fannie Mae that is significant here.
Yeah, I appreciate you breaking that down. And Sanjay, are you in the similar boat with that, or do you have any different ideas about what's going on with Bitcoin and being recognized by Fannie Mae?
I agree with a lot of what Chase said. It's been possible to borrow against your Bitcoin for actually a long time. I think the fact that an institution like Fannie Mae is recognizing that is great advancement for Bitcoin, but it's always been possible, or rather, it's been possible for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's nice to see Bitcoiners being able to leverage an asset that we've all understood to be pristine collateral. I think the fact that they're doing Bitcoin and not, a host of altcoins shows the importance of liquidity. Even though Bitcoin has a price, so do a lot of altcoins. But with Bitcoin, you can actually sell tens, hundreds of millions of it and not necessarily impact the price. So it's nice to see Bitcoin being singled out in this way.
Yeah. I mean, this is just another example I think we're seeing of Bitcoin being validated by a lot of these legacy systems that initially turned their nose to it, right? And we're seeing this happen in real time. And it kind of makes me think it's kind of has it's dissimilar, but a similar effect to just hearing Trump being like, hey, we're going to make a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That kind of happened, but not really. But the very fact of who is talking about it certainly, I think, validates it to a lot of people that aren't already in the space. And the behavior we're seeing, or the shift we're seeing here in behavior, feels pretty massive, guys, because people are no longer needing to sell their Bitcoin to buy. We know those existed before. I know there's a lot of places that do that, like Ledin, and I think Zappo does it as well. But from Fannie Mae, it means a different thing because we got no tax hit, no giving up upside, and this is appealing now more to the masses than just the crypto familiar, Bitcoin familiar community. So my question for you guys, and Chase, let's start with you. How much do you think this changes how Bitcoin holders think about their wealth going forward? Because this isn't just, I think, validating. I mean, it's validating to Bitcoiners, but it's also validating to Bitcoin itself. So does that change anything you think about Bitcoiners and how they feel going forward? Or were they already feeling this way and this is just another tool that they were expecting down the line anyway?
I think most Bitcoiners, OGs, Bitcoin maxis have been expecting and anticipating news like this from institutions. I think one of the most important metrics to track in Bitcoin is the borrowing rates against your Bitcoin as collateral, because most Bitcoiners do not ever want to sell their Bitcoin, right? Especially at this point in the S-curve of adoption, where we still believe that there's easily a 10x, perhaps a 50x or more to come. So, Bitcoiners do not want to sell. Sometimes they have to sell. They need liquidity for life events. But if you can get that borrowing rate down from kind of the 9 to 12% range that it's at now to something that's like SOFR +1, where we're able to borrow against our Bitcoin at, call it 4 or 5% interest. Now, all of a sudden, the scarcity of Bitcoin actually increases, I would argue, like 20-fold. Because yes, we know that Bitcoin is a finite asset, but if Bitcoiners and their life events keep forcing Bitcoin back onto the exchanges, back into the market, well, then, it's never going to feel like that completely finite asset that's going to send prices to the moon. So once people can really borrow against their Bitcoin at rates that they feel very comfortable that Bitcoin will outperform over the long term, which a 4 or 5% should make just about any Bitcoiner happy and reluctant to ever sell. That, I think, is when we see kind of this increased scarcity in the market and runaway prices.
That's a super well put. And Sanjay, you have more to add? I love that, Chase. Thank you for sharing.
It's actually a lesser talked about impact of the ETFs, particularly after this in-kind conversion was allowed. Now what Bitcoiners can do is borrow against their Bitcoin. They can convert to the ETF. So you got physical to ETF conversion, and there's a variety of APs and one removed from AP firms that'll do this for you. They'll charge you 15, 25, maybe even up to 50 basis points to do that. But you can convert your physical Bitcoin into an ETF. All you're doing is you're wrapping your Bitcoin into an ETF. And like Chase was saying, your rates drop from, it's about like, what is Ledin, like 10, 12%? I think some firms are now offering slightly lower than 10%, but you can borrow at Robinhood. You can borrow at Robinhood for a 4 handle today. And you can only do that if you wrap your Bitcoin into the ETF vehicle.
And, I was excited, guys, to have you two back on because At Savannah, you're building something around unlocking home equity into Bitcoin. And this is like kind of the inverse of that, using Bitcoin to unlock real estate. So, Sanjay, do you see these two trends converging into a broader system where assets are just more fluid between each other? Like, how do you see this progressing over time?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's exactly what you said. It's the inverse. So what you have with OG Bitcoiners sitting on a lot of Bitcoin is a lot of wealth, but no way really to access it because doing so was prohibitively expensive. Rates are 10+% to borrow against your Bitcoin. Whereas the ETF has enabled those Bitcoiners to now tap into their Bitcoin wealth at much more reasonable, much more accessible rates. And Solana is, in some sense, doing something similar for home equity. A lot of folks are sitting on a lot of home equity, but they can't access it, they can't tap it to better their lives because it requires a monthly payment. That is either beyond their reach or for whatever reason they're unable to make. And so we're sort of doing the same thing with home equity, which is here's a way to take wealth that you already have, that you're already sitting on. It's not Bitcoin, OG physical Bitcoin wealth, but it's home equity. And we're making that accessible.
Yeah, I love that. And for anyone who's interested out there, really quick, where can they go find what you and the team at Savannah are doing? Because this is a really important product for people to get Bitcoin access through their equity and their home equity in the future. So if someone wanted to learn more, really quick, guys, where can they go?
Savannah.io, our website explains it all. Savannah.io.
Awesome, guys. So definitely encourage you all to check that out. Chase, go ahead real quick.
Yeah, I was just going to add, the one thing that makes Savannah unique and novel here is that it's a way to tap your home equity to buy Bitcoin in a way where there is no money up front, no interest, no monthly payment, and no selling your home. So it almost sounds too good to be true, and we explain how it works at Savannah.io, but it really is the most frictionless way to bridge the 55 trillion or so of US residential home equity into Bitcoin. It's a totally frictionless experience, and we're excited to tap into that massive asset class and hopefully flood some of that capital into the strongest monetary network in existence.
Yeah, guys. I mean, it's exciting. This is an amazing product. I definitely encourage everybody to go take a look at it if you haven't already. It may sound too good to be true, but sometimes Bitcoin is that thing. It's this sound hard money we've all been waiting for, but it is true. So go check it out at Savannah. We're going to take a quick break, guys, but when we're back, we're going to be breaking down more of this morning's top news stories. So stay tuned. RoxomTV News and the guys from Savannah will be back with you right after this. Looks like our time today is coming to an end, but man, is it fun to have both Chase and Sanjay here with me talking about everything we've had in our top stories today and all the amazing things you guys are doing at Savannah. So before I let you guys go, we talked about it before the break. Really quick, Savannah's letting people unlock equity from their homes so they can invest in Bitcoin. Sanjay, one more time, what's the best place that our audience can find more information about Savannah and what you and Chase are talking about? Because you guys got some great takes, and I'm sure the world would love to hear them as well if they haven't already. So where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website really is the best place to get started, Savannah.io. And Chase, can you direct folks to our newly created X account?
Yeah, I'm managing our X and LinkedIn accounts here. So any help with new followers would be much appreciated. You can find it in the footer at Savannah.io or go to @SavannahBTC on X or @SavannahBTC on LinkedIn. And we're very easy to reach.
Amazing. Well, you guys heard it from the horse's mouth. So Sanjay, Chase, so great having you guys back on. I'm so happy you guys were able to join us today back on the show. It's always great getting to talk shop with you two guys. You're doing amazing stuff over at Savannah, and you're always amazing when you join us here at RoxomTV News. So I want to thank you both for your time this Tuesday, and I hope you have a great week. Could be excited to have you back on soon, all right?
Thank you, Hank.
Thanks, Hank.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. See you soon. Bye. All right, gang, we're moving on to more of this morning's top news stories. So let's get on into it. Because while Washington is trying to isolate Iran, one of its biggest partners just made a very different calculation. India has resumed oil imports from Iran after a 7-year pause, purchasing 44,000 metric tons of LPG loaded on sanctioned vessels. Now, this is the first time such deal since U.S. sanctions shut the door back in 2017. But the reality is now pretty simple. India needs energy, Iran has supply, and even the United States has quietly relaxed some restrictions to ease global shortages. So the lines are starting to blur. Now, in exchange, India says it expects cooperation from Iran to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. That's a direct transactional deal happening in real time. And it shows that when energy security gets tight, even allies start making decisions based less on alignment and more on survival. And just weeks before a massive courtroom showdown, OpenAI is making its first move, as the company has sent letters to state attorneys generals in California and Delaware asking them to investigate Elon Musk for alleged anti-competitive behavior. OpenAI claims that Musk has been coordinating with Meta's Mark Zuckerberg to undermine its position in the AI market. And this all comes as jury selection for the Musk versus OpenAI lawsuit, where Musk is seeking more than $100 billion in damages. So this isn't some random timing here. It's a calculated effort to shape how regulators and potentially jurors view Musk before the trial even starts. And it signals something bigger happening across the AI space, because this fight isn't just about products anymore. It's about who controls the industry now that the battle is moving into courtrooms and government offices instead of just code releases. And in the middle of a news cycle dominated by conflict, something very different just happened. You see, out in deep space, NASA's Artemis 2 mission completed a 7-hour flyby of the moon, marking humanity's first return to lunar orbit since 1972. The crew pushed farther than any humans ever have, breaking Apollo 13's distance record at 252,756 miles away from Earth. During a 40-minute communications blackout behind the moon, the crew captured images of terrain features, including impact craters and ancient lava flows. Now they're heading home, with splashdown scheduled off the coast of San Diego on Friday, April 10th. And while most of the world is focused on instability down here, this mission is a reminder that progress is still happening somewhere far above it. Moving on to across parts of Africa, Russia is working to build a parallel cross-border payment system using a ruble-backed crypto network designed to bypass Western sanctions. The project centers on a platform called A7, founded by fugitive banker Elon Musk and backed by defense-linked Promisivizabon. I can't do that word. Now, Musk has been explicit about the purpose, saying the system was created in response to sanctions and has already proven very effective and convenient for international payments. And this isn't a quiet rollout either. Moscow is actively trying to expand the platform, with hiring underway in Togo and announced operations in Nigeria and Zimbabwe. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has framed A7 as the country's first international financial platform, even noting that 84% of Russia's trade with African countries is now conducted in rubles. At the same time, Vladimir Putin is positioning this as part of a broader shift toward new economic partnerships. But when you look closer, the reality on the ground is a lot less convincing. Independent reporting has found little evidence of meaningful adoption, with local professionals unaware of the platform and claims about trade volume difficult to verify. So what you're seeing isn't a widely adopted financial system yet, it's a workaround being built out of necessity. And that distinction matters, because building a network is one thing, but getting people to actually trust and use it is something entirely different. All right, so joining us this morning to talk about this story and others, I want to welcome Susie Violet Ward to the show. Susie, how are you? It's been too long. Great to have you back. Oh, I'm not hearing Susie here. I think we might have an audio. There she is.
We're still doing that. We've been out the pandemic and it's like, you're on mute still. Hey, Hank, it's so nice to see you.
Oh, Susie, it's better to see you. And I'm excited to have you to talk stories, because boy, the world's in total chaos right now, but it makes a lot of good fodder here for us. So let's get into it. This story is particularly interesting because it's not happening on a battlefield. We're seeing it happen in financial infrastructure. So when you see Russia building something like this, do you think this is more about innovation, or is it more about survival under the sanctions they're seeing? I'd love to get your read on this one.
Well, first of all, it sounds like a gun. Like as soon as I heard that, the name of it, it definitely does. I wonder if that name has been chosen on purpose, but I don't know, on paper, it looks like another attempt to get around sanctions. And I completely understand it. I don't really like the idea that you can have a superpower that can impose sanctions on other countries like that. The weaponization of money is, why we love Bitcoin. But a ruble-linked stablecoin and some alternative rails, pushing it in places like Africa. Right now, like you said, I just can't see there being any evidence of adoption. And people on the ground don't really seem to know much about it, which kind of usually tells you that it's just really early or it's just not landing. And, this feeds into the talk about BRICS, where they're trying to build a new currency within the BRICS nations and move away from the dollar, just to create a new financial order, really. It sounds big, but in reality, it is very slow and messy and kind of theoretical. But, they are not waiting for alignment. They just seem to be experimenting and testing things out. And they know that they can't replace a system overnight. So they're just kind of building things around it as little workarounds. And Africa makes sense as a testing ground. It's less entrenched in infrastructure. It's more open to alternatives. They have more problems to solve and fewer ties to Western financial controls, really. So I don't know, not convinced. It just sounds like a good news story.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And you're somebody who's written a lot about trust in financial systems. And this feels like that could be a key tension here, because even if the rails for this exist, people still got to trust them, right? So how hard is that to build, especially when it's state-backed like this? That seems like a tall task to get people to really trust this as a platform that they can reliably use, right?
Yeah, so a state-backed stablecoin tied to the ruble isn't exactly the most attractive or trusted system, especially in markets that already understand the risks of currency instability. So I doubt it will gain traction, but the direction is the thing. They want out and they don't want to be affected by sanctions.
Yeah. And then, on top of that, we're seeing figures like Sergey Lavrov positioning this as a major shift away from the dollar, which is something that's being talked about a lot, specifically with what's going on in Iran, the whole petrodollar thing. So my question for you, Susie, is how seriously should that be taken? Is this an early signal you think of something real, or is this more of just a geopolitical narrative that's being pushed around right now?
I think they're experimenting. I think that they know that there's a problem. When they went into Ukraine, they knew that they were going to be sanctioned. They know that this is what the US do. So I think it is largely experimentation that probably won't work, but it is the direction of travel that they're heading in.
And then, you further contrast that with some of the independent reporting coming out showing, we're saying there's very limited adoption on the ground. You and I talked about that. Does that gap between what's being claimed and what actually is happening tell you more about the project itself or about how difficult it is to build a system that people actually use?
Both.
Yeah.
And I think that everything is just about rhetoric and trying to convince people of certain things depending on what your agenda is. It's very difficult to know in this day and age what's real and what's not. And to me, this just seems like something that they ultimately want to have, but it's still very early days.
Yeah. And another question is, we're seeing countries look for ways to evade these sanctions. So they're looking for alternatives to systems passed. What do you think that means for the Bitcoin of it all? Do you think in some ways this could have people flock to Bitcoin more? Is it, as reliance on the dollar continues to weaken given all these geopolitical conflicts we're seeing right now? Just what do you think of the Bitcoin of all this? Is this ultimately a good thing for Bitcoin? Do you think it'll drive people toward alternative options like Bitcoin? I'd love to hear your take.
I think all roads lead to Bitcoin. Absolutely. And I wrote about this in 2023 about the BRICS currency and what they were trying to do, because they originally said that they wanted the BRICS currency to be backed by commodities. So they were thinking oil and gold. But we know that it might suit them to have a currency like this, but there is no trust between these nations. China's not going to trust how much oil Russia has, and Russia's not going to trust how much gold China has. But there is something that we have that is open source, global, neutral, and verifiable. And so it makes sense to me that if they're going to develop an alternative currency or an alternative system, then you want a neutral currency that is peer-to-peer, that cannot be screwed with or interfered with by governments. And there is one really obvious solution to that, and that is Bitcoin.
Yeah, and we already know about Bitcoin. It's already there. Like, it does seem like an obvious solution. And as you said, all roads lead to Bitcoin, and this certainly seems to be one of them. So, Susie, you and I, though, are going to take a quick break because we still have a lot to talk about. But when we're back, we're going to be talking more about this morning's top stories, figuring out what's happening across the globe. In just a bit, we're going to be joined by another guest. The one and only Frank Corva is going to be joining Susie and I to help make sense of all the madness in the world. So stay tuned, gang. Susie, myself, and Frank will be joining us in just a bit for more RoxomTV News. See you in a sec.
Yesterday, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump hosted the annual White House Easter egg roll, welcoming children and families to the South Lawn for the traditional celebration. But the festivities were quickly overshadowed by the escalating crisis with Iran. Between egg rolls and whistles, the president stepped aside to address reporters and delivered some of his most direct warnings yet.
Let me just tell you, very fair question. The Iranian people, when they don't hear bombs go off, they're upset. They want to hear bombs because they want to be free. And the only reason they're not out protesting, you know that, is because they were informed that if they protest, like the wrestler and his friends, if they protest, they will be shot immediately. And that's an edict, that's in writing. If they protest, if they go out in the streets, they will be immediately shot. They don't have guns. You know, we sent some guns, but the group that was supposed to give, which I said would happen to my people, I said it, I called it exactly. We sent guns, a lot of guns. They were supposed to go to the people so they could fight back against these thugs. You know what happened? The people that they sent them to kept them because they said, what a beautiful gun, I think I'll keep it. So I'm very upset with a certain group of people, and they're going to pay a big price for that. But the Iranian people will fight back as soon as they know they're not going to be shot and as soon as they can get weapons.
The conflict, now in its sixth week, has already claimed over 3,400 lives across the Middle East, sent oil prices surging past $114 a barrel, and shut down the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil normally flows. The president acknowledged that Iran has submitted a 10-point proposal through Pakistani mediators, calling it a significant step, but not enough. Meanwhile, China is weighing in on the crisis. At a press briefing in Beijing today, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning called on all parties to seize what she described as an opportunity for peace. China expressed support for Pakistan's role as mediator between Washington and Tehran and said it stands ready to play what it called a constructive role in ending the conflict. The statement comes as Iran's 10-point response to the U.S. peace framework remains on the table, with Tehran rejecting the proposed 45-day ceasefire and instead demanding a permanent end to the war, reconstruction aid, and the lifting of international sanctions. Away from the tensions on Earth, history was being made in space. Yesterday, the 4 astronauts aboard NASA's Artemis 2 mission flew by the moon, reaching farther from Earth than any human in over 56 years, breaking a record held since Apollo 13. Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialist Christina Koch and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen cruised roughly 4,000 miles above the lunar surface, witnessing the far side of the moon as it eclipsed a distant basketball-sized Earth behind them.
Also, an interesting part of the discussion that I heard between Reed and Jeremy is that from Galushko to Grimaldi, there are 2 dark features there that look like commas.
Love the descriptions. You're definitely looking odd up there. Appreciate seeing the training being implemented.
Oh, I floated away from the speaker. Say it again, please.
The moment brought the crew to tears. Yesterday, President Trump held a formal press briefing at the White House where he went further than any of his previous warnings.
But we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And after that, they're going to have no bridges. They're going to have no power plants.
The president laid out in detail what he said was a military plan to destroy every bridge and every power plant in Iran within 4 hours, with complete demolition by midnight if no deal is reached by his 8 p.m. Eastern deadline tonight. Trump said the entire country could be, in his words, taken out in one night. but added he hopes it doesn't come to that.
In Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to. We don't want that to happen. We may even get involved with helping them rebuild their nation. And you know what? If that's the case, the last thing we want to do is start with power plants, which are among the most expensive thing, and bridges. You saw the bridge went. We were very close to a deal. And then I got a call from Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, and JD saying, I think they're breaking the deal. I said, tell them that's okay. Don't worry about it. But tell them to look out their window and watch. And within 45 minutes, I gave the order to knock out the biggest bridge. I gave the order, knock out the biggest bridge in, I believe, the Middle East, but the biggest bridge in Iran. And within 10 minutes after I gave that order, that bridge was over.
Iran was quick to fire back. Hours after Trump's threats, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a defiant response. Spokesman Ibrahim Zulfikari dismissed the president's warnings as baseless threats from a delusional leader, saying they stem from a military deadlock and repeated American defeats. Zulfikari vowed that what he called offensive and crushing operations against U.S. and Israeli forces would continue, and warned Washington that every action it takes will only add to its humiliation in the region.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. We continue with breaking news this morning as off the coast of Iran, U.S. forces have carried out strikes on military targets across Kharg Island early Tuesday, hitting sites similar to previous operations but avoiding key energy infrastructure. Now that matters because Kharg Island is one of Iran's main oil export hubs. So what wasn't hit is just as important as ultimately what was. And this comes as President Donald Trump posted, and I quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." Then, almost in the same breath, Trump floated the idea of something revolutionarily wonderful happening if leadership in Iran changes. That's the tone heading into the 8 p.m. Eastern deadline, which he set yesterday as the final cutoff for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Trump reiterated the U.S. plans to decimate Iranian infrastructure if that doesn't happen, and Iran isn't backing down. In fact, Iran rejected the United States' ceasefire proposal and instead sent its own 10-point plan through Pakistan, demanding reparations and long-term control over the Strait of Hormuz's traffic, and called the U.S. proposal unrealistic. Now, Trump is calling this progress, but not enough. So now we're staring at a deadline where both sides are still far apart. And when that language escalates this quickly, the risk isn't of what just gets said, it's what happens if someone decides to follow through. We're bringing Susie back to chat about this one. And we got Frank too. Bringing them both. All right, so we're bringing Susie back, and we got the one and only Frank Corva joining us. Frank, thanks for joining Susie and I this morning. Always a treat having you on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. Good to see you as well. This is a pleasant surprise all around here. I got a text from the producer for the show, a mutual friend of all of ours, and was very pleasantly surprised to be here with all of you. So thank you for having me.
Well, the pleasant surprise is all on this side of things, Frank. It's always great to have you, especially when we got Susie in the mix. So let's get into it, you two, because we've got a lot to talk about. So Frank, you just joined us. So let's start with you on this one. When you look at something like this, where strikes are happening, but they're deliberately avoiding major energy infrastructure, it almost feels like a message is being sent without really going all the way. So how are you interpreting that right now? Is that restraint, or is that setting the stage for maybe something bigger? What do you make of this right now, these strikes on Kharg Island from the United States?
Three words that come to mind as you ask if it's setting the stage for something bigger, and they are, I hope not. I don't this escalation happening by any stretch of the imagination. I think Trump's rhetoric has been deplorable. It's been really disheartening to see. To be blunt, I feel quite ashamed to be an American watching this stuff happen. be happening. We should not be threatening people like this. I've covered what's happening in Iran a bit on my own, both in touch with sources on the ground. I've had people on my podcast who are from Iran or from neighboring countries. And on a certain level, I can have sympathy for this idea that, okay, some Iranian people don't want to be living under the regime. I could feel for that. It doesn't sound like a fun regime to live under. I can have sympathy for anyone in that position who wants an ally in the United States to be free from that. Not that it's necessarily the United States' responsibility to go and do that, nor do I think it is the reason why the United States is there doing what it's doing. But I can have sympathy for that. I cannot have sympathy for tweets that are insinuating that genocide is happening within a few hours. I don't even know what to make of that, to be honest. And it's really difficult for me to try to make light of it, to be really blunt. Not to try to come here and be a downer, but I think this is just we're many steps too far at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think you're echoing a lot of sentiments that many of Americans are feeling right now. Normally as Americans, we think we're the good guys and we're on the right side of history. And this is one of those few times during my lifetime where it doesn't necessarily feel that way. And Susie, Frank and I, we're over here in the colonies. You're on the other side of the pond. I would love to get, what is the beat you're getting from the world in terms of this war and how the United States is positioned in it right now? Because it's different to hear the rhetoric come out of our own country, but I'd love to get your beat on the more world stage. What are you making of what's going on right now?
Well, I think this explains why the markets have tanked. But I don't think it feels measured or controlled. And I'm not a massive fan of our prime minister, but I actually agree with the way that he's been handling this, because it didn't feel right to me that you could just go into a country and then expect everybody else to fall in line. And Trump's even referring to this as infrastructure day. I can't get over how blatant he's being, and like you said, Frank, the rhetoric is getting harsher and harsher and harsher and more absolute and noticeably less diplomatic, I would say. And for me, that suggests the opposite of strength. It suggests that he can't cope with the pressure, and it feels a little bit like he's losing it, and that his threats aren't landing, and that he knows that. And what I think we're seeing is a lot of frustration and not much strategy.
Yeah, Trump's used to wielding that big stick effectively, and it sounds like he keeps making these deadlines and nobody's taking them seriously. So it certainly feels like he's under a different kind of pressure than we've seen previously. And, there's this interesting dynamic right now we're experiencing, guys, where military action is very much already underway, but at the same time, we're hearing there's still talks of a deal. So, Frank, from the outside, that can feel a little contradictory to a lot of us out there. Do you think that's strategic pressure we're seeing, or does it risk making the situation harder to read on the other side? What are you making of the rhetoric compared to what's actually happening on the ground right now?
I don't know. I think it's all just a matter of trying to save face. Some might argue that what you're saying is some version of 4D chess, while I don't think that's happening here. I think just
giving him a lot of credit.
Could it be? Maybe. I can't really piece together what that looks like. I can usually think in the abstract and think, okay, maybe this is what's trying to go on here, but I don't know what it is. More than anything, it just seems like the strategy is chaos, just cause as much chaos as possible, say many contradicting things to keep everybody off balance. But the problem with everybody being off balance is you cause psychological breakdowns around the world, and that might happen amongst people with power to do things like deploy weapons. And it's not a good thing. But more than that, even I do my best to stay sort of removed from this, especially as someone who was once very close to it in the White House. I do my best to stay emotionally kind of removed, to try to take a certain perspective where it's like, okay, what's going on here? What is the potential 4D chess? I don't see that being played right now. I see desperation because the Strait of Hormuz, if it does not open, the same pain that we're seeing play out in Southeast Asia right now, that's happening. It's probably coming to Europe next. We'll be in the United States a week after that, 10 days after that. And it's the sort of pain that I don't think anybody is really ready for. We're talking about potentially prices doubling on everything. This isn't just for the petrol that you use to fill up your car. We use oil in everything. We need it for deliveries of food. All of the food prices are going up. This is not what Trump campaigned on. This was, he was talking about Main Street first. This is the complete antithesis of that. And I think that the pain is going to be so acute, especially in his mind. You have to imagine there's some political calculus of it's April, there's midterm elections in November. That's not too far away. People do tend to have amnesia, but within 5-6 months, I don't know that that's going to be enough time for people to really forget about this. Nor will the effects of this probably go away in 5 or 6 months. Even if this does get resolved sooner than later, there are still going to be lasting effects to what has gone on here. Some of that around the credibility of the United States, some of that around just basically prices and things that are going to impact Main Street and have an effect on the way that people vote a few months from now.
Yeah, I think people are definitely underestimating how expensive this is going to make everything. I paid $9 for blueberries last week. That's up from $8 the week before. So things are getting more expensive and I don't like it. And Susie, you know, we're talking about this rhetoric we're getting and there's boots on the ground where they're like, hey, a deal could still very much be in place. So do you think this is Trump playing 4D chess, or do you think he's painted himself into a corner and he just doesn't know what to do right now? Because he thought this war would be over quickly. Here we are weeks later and things seem as entrenched as ever. So where do you lie on that one? Do you think he's playing a game we don't understand, or does he not even understand the game he's playing?
I think his words were very soon, actually. He likes to use the word very a lot, doesn't he? But he did actually say that. And at the time I was thinking very soon. I don't think that's the case at all. These are just words that are meaningless. But I think there's a real human layer to this. There's an enormous amount of pressure for anyone to carry. And when you factor in Trump's age, the intensity of the scrutiny, the pace at which events are moving, it's just not surprising that communication then suddenly becomes really reactive. But it's exactly the kind of environment where his words are really important, because even a really small shift in language can have really large consequences. So when you hear statements that sound more like ultimatums and less like negotiations, it starts to feel like something is very, very off. And like the situation for him is becoming much harder to control, and the messaging is trying to compensate for that. I'm not sure how it will play out, but it just doesn't feel good.
It doesn't. And he straight up like mocked, was it Islam or something the other day, when praised to Allah? Like, if you wanted to get yourself, you know, I hope not, of course, but like he's really putting a big target on his back to like billions of people right now. I really don't understand it. And, you know, guys, good, Frank.
A quick point there. He's not only putting a target on his back. Like, I live in New York City. You know, I've seen 2 buildings fall down as a result of a terrorist attack. There's people here already talking about not wanting to go to Midtown because they fear something else happening, and for good reason. This is not. Tucker Carlson said it best. We don't live in a theocracy. We should not be trying to wage holy war. This should not be going on. We have seen the results of doing that already, especially living in the city in New York. To me, watching it, it's inexcusable, because it's not just putting a target on his back. Maybe he'll get impeached. Maybe something will happen to him. You're putting a target potentially on the backs of everybody who lives in a major center that a religious extremist might want to target if there's, you know, if they felt so compelled to do so. So I think the repercussions of this are far beyond what he's figuring into his calculus at this point, and I wish he were thinking a little bit more about it.
Yeah, you make a great
Frank,
point.
I'd like to pick up on something you said, because sorry, Hank, because Tucker Carlson actually said that that people around the president should be willing to say no, and for him to come out and say something like that's a big deal. And then you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about the 25th Amendment and questioning whether or not, you know, he's making rational decisions. And when you do frame it around the idea of destroying a civilization, you know, that is madness and not policy. And I think she said that America hasn't dropped not a single bomb has been dropped on America, and we cannot kill an entire civilization because of Donald Trump's whims. And I think that sums it up perfectly.
Yeah, and you both make really great points. I mean, it really isn't just a target on his back, to Frank's point. It's really a target on every American, like we saw in 9/11. Let's really make billions of people angry at all of us again. Sounds like a great plan. Because, you know, guys, we're seeing these move from threats to now these actual strikes. And kind of to what the point Frank was making, it feels like the tone of this situation is changing very quickly. So, Frank, in your experience, does that usually narrow the path to de-escalation, or do you think diplomacy can still realistically catch up after that line has been crossed that we've been seeing here? Because this is going from a Middle Eastern war to, you could almost be like, you could make the case this is like an ideological war for this entire group of people right now. And I could understand them responding as such. So what are your thoughts? Is de-escalation possible here, or are we just heading down an increasingly deeper and darker rabbit hole with this?
It's a really good question. I think the fact that you're asking the question is really, it's alarming to me to hear it, because I think that question is on everybody's mind. Did we cross a line that we cannot uncross at this point? That's what feels like the main question is. Can de-escalation happen? Sure, it could theoretically, but on a certain level, what gets factored in at these points, when you're now talking about mocking someone's religion, doing so on Easter morning in the United States, even more so, just really strange stuff. But mocking someone's religion, you've hurt people there. People on the ground have been hurt. And I'm not saying that because I'm sympathetic to the regime. And I know that the regime has hurt people there, tens of thousands of people, 40 to 50,000 people they've killed. So I'm not saying that, but we're, an eye for an eye and everybody goes blind. That's one thing that comes to mind here.
Yep.
But the other side is just ego. There's a certain amount of human ego of you have disrespected people to a certain degree that certain people who don't have as much control over their ego or their emotions, and some of those people are in positions of power, are going to want to push back in some way to show that they can't be pushed around. I pray that cooler heads prevail, that people can realize that maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe Trump is unstable at this point. I really don't know. But ideally, yes, to answer your question, yes, we can de-escalate from here, but that's going to take somebody stepping in at this point. I think everybody is at this point is just wondering what tweet comes out tomorrow, what Truth Social post comes out tomorrow, and then what is that going to do? And there is going to be a breaking point with this. It might come from the other side saying, hey, look, we're only going to be talked to this way so much. We're only going to be made to look a fool in front of the world this much. Or it might come from Trump saying, my threats are no longer working. What can I do now to escalate? Which is petrifying to me to even think about or say out loud.
I mean, he literally said, and we heard that statement, a whole civilization will die tonight. So even if someone isn't following the policy details here, that's a pretty hard statement to ignore from the president of the free world. So, Susie, I'd be curious, how do you think messaging like that lands with the global audience right now that's trying to figure out how serious this situation actually is or is not? I'd love to get your thoughts over from the UK.
Well, it doesn't sound very presidential to me. And I noticed that JD Vance is trying to project calm and confidence. I don't think he was a big fan of the war. And didn't he go missing for a little while? Just went a little bit quiet. So I think it suggests that Iran will not respond in the way that Trump wants them to, because you've got a guy, the Ayatollah. He's lost his family. He hates the West. He's got nothing to lose. This is what you're up against. He's going to stop at nothing. And it just doesn't line up to me. And the inconsistency is why I don't think this is going to work. It just sounds like pure panic and like somebody who's completely out of their depth. Because if you look at it from Iran's perspective, it's hard to see why they would back down from this public pressure. Being threatened with destruction in such absolute terms does not create an off-ramp. It removes one. It makes compromise look like weakness. And when both sides are pushing in different directions like this, backing down becomes politically or ideologically impossible. And so I can't see how this is going to be resolved under these circumstances.
Yeah, I agree, Susie. I think you really nailed it with the word inconsistency, because there's something, we'll call it interesting, about pairing really extreme warnings with language about something revolutionarily wonderful potentially happening, which I thought was an interesting phrasing in Trump's speech. It almost feels like two different messages are being said at the same time. So, Frank, how do you think that kind of communication gets interpreted internationally? Because that is some weird rhetoric. We're going to decimate the whole civilization, but hey, something wonderfully amazing might also happen. What do you read from that?
There's multiple levels to this. There's a friend of mine. I have a friend in I think he's in Holland or in the Netherlands, who's a political scientist. A friend of mine from here in New York who moved over there, who was telling me years ago sort of the dangers of somebody conducting international diplomacy via their Twitter account. That in and of itself, the fact that this messaging is coming out through a social media platform versus a filter, the White House officially releasing a statement from Trump on the issue, that in and of itself is troubling. Then within that, essentially to have mixed messaging, it leads to a situation where I believe what ended up igniting World War I was a miscommunication, which led to an assassin. This is my very limited understanding, not a specialist here, but my friend explaining this to me, I remember. But there's oftentimes what ignites a conflict is misunderstanding. It's when one side thinks something is going to happen, so they do something defensively to stop something. So what happened in these moments of confusion, there's this, okay, well, what are we going to do? We have instinct as human beings to defend ourselves, to survive. What are we going to do to survive? That answer only becomes it becomes a bigger and bigger question, I'm sorry, that people have to ask themselves. And then what are they going to do to respond to that question? Anybody's guess. And beyond that, I think the bigger thing that's been going through my mind is like, American people, the average American, there's enough. I mean, people around the world, prices are skyrocketing. Things are tough. Things are, what's it called? Uncertain on many different levels for people right now. You have AI anxiety. You have just, again, prices being higher than most people are expecting. They don't really understand why this is the case. And so you're adding all this other uncertainty, just everyday people's lives. And again, as someone who lives in a major metropolitan area, there's a whole different level of uncertainty there too. But to the point about just being conducted through a social media account, and then two, mixed messaging, there's so many variables there that can lead to a not so great outcome.
Yeah, these are truly unprecedented times. And you two, if we step back for a second from these specifics, and I want to talk about what's happening right now. We have this hard deadline for 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight, right? But we also know the president has a history of shifting timelines and ongoing negotiations. So, Susie, I'd be curious, how do people, whether that's markets or other countries, like over in the UK, decide how seriously to take what we're hearing from the president right now? Because I just don't feel like I can believe anything.
It's so tricky. I don't think people take him seriously at all, really. And it is the inconsistency that I think that the markets are reacting to. But the problem is when somebody does come across like that much of a nutter, that's when you are actually scared, because you do start to wonder whether or not they have any boundaries. And if he is slightly losing his marbles, and he is maybe going the same way as Biden, which is something that I've thought about a lot, you know, maybe Marjorie's right. You know, maybe they should somehow stop him. Tucker Carlson, say no. I don't know. I think he needs to be reined in a little bit, because I think he's going to cause a lot of damage. Obviously, not just to the people in Iran and potentially their infrastructure if he does go ahead with it, but you know, to America and relations and to all the countries that he's trying to drag into this war as well, like the UK.
Yeah, it's so weird because he says so many crazy things. It makes it hard to believe anything. It kind of reminds me of like if you follow Kanye West on Twitter, it's like the same thing, like unintentionally hilarious, but it's okay to an extent because it's Kanye West. He's not the leader of the free world, but we can't have the same types of tweets coming from the president of the United States because it just makes everything impossible to predict. And that's where we are right now. And I'm going to move on, gang, to the next story here. So hang tight. I'm going to bring you both back in a second to chat about it, because as tensions are escalating overseas, the fight over information is starting to heat up here in the United States. You see, President Trump is threatening to jail a journalist who reported that a second American airman was missing after an F-15E was shot down in Iran. Let's take a look at what he said during yesterday's press conference.
But these two extraordinary rescues, because it was two, and as you probably know, we didn't talk about the first one for an hour. Then somebody leaked something, which we'll hopefully find that leaker. We're looking very hard to find that leaker. And talked about there's somebody missing. They basically said that we have one and there's somebody missing. Well, they didn't know there was somebody missing until this leaker gave the information. So whoever it was, we think we'll be able to find it out, because we're going to go to the media company that released it, and we're going to say, national security, give it up or go to jail. Because when they did that, all of a sudden, the entire country of Iran knew that there was a pilot that was somewhere on their land that was fighting for his life.
Now, Trump's argument is that the report tipped off Iran, which then broadcast a bounty for the airman's capture, making the rescue operation even more dangerous. And the threat came during the same press conference where he praised the mission as historic. So within the same briefing, the tone shifted from celebrating a successful rescue to warning the press about consequences. And it raises a real tension between operational security and public accountability. Because once reporting becomes part of the battlefield, deciding what gets said and what doesn't becomes its own form of power. All right, I'm bringing Susie and Frank back. You two, this one feels like it sits right at the intersection of journalism and national security. So Frank, let's start with you on this one. When you see something like this, where reporting is being framed as potentially endangering lives, how do you think about where that line actually is? I'd love to get your thoughts.
I mean, reporters' job is to do their job. This is part of what it is. I think that there's been a history of Trump not necessarily liking, I'll say liking in quotes, what reporters have reported on. But my other thing there is like, I get the point he's making. Maybe you're endangering someone, but my thoughts are also, this is still a part of the process. This is still what the press does. And on top of that, you're acting as if Iran didn't know that something like this could be happening, like it's happening in a vacuum somewhere versus in a country where this conflict is currently playing out. So on a very small level, I kind of get the point he's making, but I think the other issue there is more he has a history of sort of having his brush ups and his issues with the press. And I would say that those issues are him not liking the press reporting on certain facts, which is very problematic on many levels. So I very, very small amount of sympathy for like, okay, maybe you're endangering someone. There's more just seems like the press doing their job.
Yeah, Susie, same question. Is this the press just doing their job, or is Trump making a real argument here? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I actually think I agree with Trump a little bit more on this one. Because I think it's a little bit more complicated than usual, more complicated than Trump versus the media. We're talking about a live military operation inside Iran involving a downed US fighter jet and a stranded airman hiding in hostile territory. And so when the reporting came out that the second rescue was still ongoing, Trump's argument that the leak could have altered or alerted Iranian forces and put the airmen at a greater risk, it's true. So it's not unreasonable to say that they are putting people in harm's way. But that said, this, as Frank said, is journalists doing their job and reporting on what they've learned. And by doing so, they may have exposed in real time operational details in an active war zone. So, this is a difference between reporting what's happened and reporting while it's still happening. So yes, you can defend the instincts. Governments have always tried to control leaks during wartime, and the idea of that sensitive information could endanger lives is not really controversial in itself, but even critics like Trump would accept that operational security is a real concern. That said, threatening to put a journalist in jail unless they reveal their sources crosses a line entirely. And that's not about protecting an operation. It's about compelling the press to give up confidential sources, which is pretty fundamental in a democratic system.
Yeah, and Frank, as an independent journalist extraordinaire yourself, how often is that concern real versus something that just gets used to push back on what could be considered uncomfortable reporting here? What are your thoughts?
A good question. I've never reported in a war zone, so it's a little bit difficult for me to speak to that. And I think the points that Susie just made there were very important to note. I have had people, I wrote a piece on a political character in South America, someone who was running for president of a country in South America, in which I had a few sources that were undisclosed. I could not disclose who they were. I think I cited about 2/3 of my sources, the actual names of those sources in the piece. And a lot of people put pressure on me to say like, well, who was he actually who were these other people saying this and that? So I know what that pressure is to reveal your sources. It's not a fun feeling, but on a certain level, you have the right to keep those sources revealed. Obviously, a lot of this, I mean, it's not a fun situation for this journalist to be in. I don't think Trump himself can just say you're going to jail. Well, I know that he can't do that. There's still going to be a process that needs to be gone through. And my guess is that that process won't actually happen. I think this is more Trump to just reacting to the frustration in the moment over what happened. But it is a real thing where people put pressure on you to try to release that stuff. And it's usually the people who are not happy with how a piece turned out or how certain reporting turned out. And it's not a fun feeling for sure.
Yeah. And it was interesting to me that this came, or what stood out to me, I should say, is that this threat against the press came during the same press conference where he was literally celebrating this historic rescue, right? So within minutes, we saw the president's narrative shift from success to control. So Susie, how do you interpret that kind of messaging? Do you think there was a strategy behind that? It was like, hey, look at this super successful operation. Also, the press needs to shut up. Like, was that like, hey, we had this success, but it almost didn't happen because of this? So was he using that? Was this, was this a strategic play on his end? What did you make of the messaging we heard in that same press conference?
Well, even the way you're describing it is very difficult to explain, and it's very, very messy, isn't it? Which I think that it just goes to demonstrate exactly what's going on here. It's muddying the waters and it's messy. And the administration itself was, publicly talking about the operation in quite a lot of detail afterwards, praising it and walking through what happened. So it becomes really hard to argue that secrecy is the overriding principle here when some of that information is being shared anyway on different terms. I don't know what to think. I just don't know because I can't follow it and I don't know what's true and I don't know what we're being told if it's accurate. And that everything is rhetoric and that they're trying to just get out of a very, very difficult situation. So I just can't really comment on that really because I just don't know what's real.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, we're really hoping he's playing 4D chess here. And if that's the case, we're all really dumb. And I'm hoping that's the case because then we're not going to World War III or something, which I don't want to say that's where this is going, but it's looking like who knows. And, YouTube, when information itself becomes part of the battlefield, like we're seeing here, Frank, who ultimately gets to decide what's responsible reporting and what crosses the line? Is that something journalists can realistically navigate themselves, or does it inevitably become more political, especially in an arena like this?
I think there are a certain set of standards out there, but I think some of this also comes down to, on certain levels or in certain ways, it's a bit more of an art than a science, and you kind of have to trust your gut on what feels like this is information that the public needs to know versus this maybe potentially is endangering whatever. You have to make those decisions because I think, we could talk about a rule book or sort of like what it looks like to share this information and not this information. And I think everybody's going to, just because we're human beings and everything in journalism is put through the subjective lens of the person who's writing it or broadcasting it. I think it's inevitably more of an art than a science. At the same time, you would hope that certain information that would be helpful on any varying number of levels would be put out there, despite the fact that it might be difficult for that journalist to put it out there. One, because the journalist might be targeted, might be threatened by the president to be put in jail or something like that. But the other side of it is I think certain information also is sensitive. And I think there's a lot of information we could discuss there, what that constitutes. But certain information is sensitive and maybe timing is a factor. When it's released is a certain factor. The way it's released, how much information, how many details are included with it. There's a billion different things that I think you have to think about there. And I will shout out my old editor, Aaron from Bitcoin Magazine. When I would do anything that was sensitive, especially if it was like the cross section of Bitcoin and politics, he would walk through these things with me. He would literally sit down and say like, okay, what's happening here? And like, there was almost like a coaching process. So I think that it's not just the journalists, the editorial staff. And there's a bunch of things that go into this. It's not as cut and dry as I think many would like to believe.
Yeah, no, I think this is an ever important conversation, especially with who we have in office right now. I can't really remember so much conflict between the press and the president as we've seen during Trump's tenures in office, but that is the way the world is moving right now. And we're glad we have independent journalists like yourself out there, Frank, helping to bring the truth to the masses. And I want to go to the next one, our next story here. We actually mentioned this guy as kind of an aside earlier in the show, but we're going to talk about him in just a second. I'll bring Frank and Susie back for that because organizers for the Wireless Festival, which takes place in London, have canceled the event. You see, this comes after they announced Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, would headline all 3 nights this July, marking his first UK booking in 11 years. But plans changed. The backlash was immediate. British Jewish groups called it deeply irresponsible, and sponsors fled, including Pepsi, Diageo, Rockstar, PayPal. They're all out. Ye then released a statement saying he wanted to bring unity, peace, and love to London and offered to meet the British Jewish community leaders. Ye's decision to release a song called Heil Hitler and sell swastika t-shirts had its consequences, though he took out a full-page Wall Street Journal apology in January, blaming manic episodes from bipolar disorder, and the UK, well, they didn't accept it. Hours later, the UK Home Office rejected his electronic travel authorization on the grounds his presence would not be conducive to the public good. And the festival was canceled entirely, and all tickets will be refunded. And this is not the first time Ye has been financially shut out after public controversy. Back in 2022, JP Morgan Chase ended its banking relationship with Yeezy LLC, one of the most high-profile debanking cases in recent memory. And the timeline shows it was already in motion before the peak of the backlash, but what followed made the dynamic clear. Once reputational risk spikes, institutions move quickly to cut exposure. And here's the broader point. In societies that value free speech, there should absolutely be debate, criticism, and consequences in the public arena. But removing someone's ability to access basic financial services, to transact and participate economically, is a different line. Even when the views are deeply controversial or offensive, the question becomes whether financial access should be contingent on acceptable opinion. Because once that precedent is set, it doesn't stay contained to just one person. And this is exactly where Bitcoin separates itself. Bitcoin doesn't care about your reputation, your politics, or your opinions. There is no bank to call, no sponsor to pressure, no government that can flip a switch and cut you off from the network. It's neutral, permissionless, and unstoppable by design. And in a world where access to money can be turned off overnight, that property is not just valuable, it's inevitable. All right, I'm going to bring Susie and Frank back. Susie, this is happening in your backyard. What did you make of this? Is this a sentiment that is felt by a lot of people in the UK, or do you think this is something else? I'd love to get your beat on this. No Kanye for you guys.
So I'm a little bit old, I think, to be aware of what people feel about this. But I don't believe in censoring anybody, really. I think you should let the free market decide. But I'm completely torn on this because at the same time, you know, I'm not a fan of what he's been doing. I mean, he does seem like quite a disturbed individual. But you know, what artist isn't? When it comes to all the greats, you know, they're all a little bit messed up, aren't they? And if you start going down that road, it becomes a very slippery slope. So it is tricky. I don't know. I could argue both sides.
Yeah, you know, Frank, I'd love to get your thoughts too. I mean, you know, some people could claim, and I'm one of them, that he's kind of a genius in some ways, but he says insane things that frankly, I've never taken him seriously, kind of like Trump. Like whatever he says, I know it's nuts. I know what to expect. I don't put too much into it. But what do you thought about this? Him being denied entry to the UK, them canceling this whole festival, and to his very small credit, he did apologize for a lot of those abhorrent remarks in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. What are you making of this whole Kanye and UK sitch?
I mean, the UK is free to do what they want to do based on whatever premises they're citing. I think, you know, again, free speech, I think, extends to that point where you're proverbially screaming fire in a crowded theater, where you're actually causing some sort of potential damage to people because you're saying something that's a lie and that's, you know, or you're inciting some sort of chaos. I don't think that that's what he's doing. I think what this feels a little bit like, and I say this as someone looking in on what's happening in the UK, also having had many conversations with Susie and the likes of Freddie Newitt, the Bitcoin Policy UK team. There is a little bit of like, we don't like what you say, so now you're in trouble feeling to it. And there's a lot of that happening with people being arrested for social media posts in the UK. And believe me, this is not me speaking from any sort of high horse here in the United States. I gave my feelings on what's happening here and everything that we're sort of getting wrong. But I think this does have a little bit of, it feels like a bit of an extension of that. Like, hey, those are bad words you use. Therefore, you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed even in our country. And so I think that there's a little bit of that gets me a little bit worried. At the same time, I think Kanye West has sort of gone off the deep end, and on a certain level, on even just like a politeness level, I guess, like he doesn't really seem like somebody I would want around either. At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily exclude him from coming to my country. So bit of a similar position with Susie. I'm kind of in the middle on this, but it is what it is.
It is. And Susie, I'd love to get your thought on something here, because this is also happening, and we can't ignore the context around which this is happening right now, right? Because Kanye was very like anti-Israel, the Jewish community, etc. This war right now very much ties into a lot of those things he might have said during that time. I don't have any quotes at hand, but there's a lot of sentiment toward, I'd say, the Jewish community, specifically Israel, that's different than we had like a year ago before this conflict started. So do you think that in any way what's happening with Kanye could be affected by the overall conflict we're seeing with the Middle East that very much involves Israel in one way or another, of which we're not entirely unsure, but we are? I'm just wondering if that context here matters for this at all.
I don't know. I'm really not sure, actually. Anything's
it's hard
possible.
to say.
Yeah, it's really difficult to say. Anything's possible, I suppose. But for me, it just comes back to you can't police speech in that way. And if people choose to go and see him, then they choose to go and see him. And that is their choice. The reason I like free speech is because it allows people to show themselves, and you get to see exactly who they are. If they say something that you don't like, at least you're aware of that. If you start policing people's thoughts or speech, then they hide themselves a little bit. We can see Kanye. We know exactly what he's like. I personally wouldn't go and see him, and that is my choice. But, you know, as I said, a lot of people, bad people, have been great artists. And where do you stop with this? But
yeah,
once again, it goes back to that point of what's true, what's going on behind the scenes, and will we ever make sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, you think about Michael Jackson. He made like $3.5 billion since he's been dead or something. So it becomes like, Frank, are we at that point where if you're talented enough, it can outweigh the controversies? It's just like, are you a net positive in talent to where your controversies aren't eclipsing that, and we'll still kind of receive you back into the good graces of the John Q public if you're willing to apologize? Like, do you think that's what's happening here with Kanye specifically? Apologize. So like, I had a friend who's Jewish who went to the show, and he's like, don't tell anybody I went here. It's incredible, but I know I'm not supposed to be here. So is that kind of where we are in the world right now? If you're net positive enough for the world, even if you had a lot of controversy, we're going to be willing to accept you back if you make an apology?
I think there's that. And I think that there's also just cognitive dissonance. So I know plenty of people who will talk about Michael Jackson, and if it is true that he did whatever things he may have done to children, obviously his music, in my mind, in my experience, is going to be tainted for the rest of time. But that's not going to be the case for everyone. And I remember this conversation also happening a lot around R. Kelly.
He was my old neighbor, by the way.
Michael Jackson or R. Kelly?
No, R. Kelly. I grew up next to him. He was a really nice guy. Not to be weird. He was very nice to me and my sister. I see him every day. Yeah.
Not to be weird, R. Kelly was my neighbor. This guy
was my neighbor
on live air without giving me a warning. All right.
Yeah.
So hang on, like a literal neighbor, like next to your house or on the same street?
I grew up in an emerging area of Chicago at the time, and he bought what was like a former fire station looking building. And I used to see him and his buddies with their cars outside when I would go to the school bus. So I'd just be like, hey, Mr. Kelly. And he'd be like, what up, shorty? And that was kind of the nature of our relationship. But to his very little credit, he was always very kind to me.
Wow. Many things I've brought up on this show. That's probably the thing I'm most happy to have brought up, just to now know that about you, Hank. So
there you go.
Yeah, that's done a number to my inside.
Oh no.
So yeah, there's people who love R. Kelly so much, like almost with like a religious fervor, that they cannot believe that he has ever done anything bad. So I think that level of cognitive dissonance of like, no one that makes music that good or is that person can possibly do those things. So I don't believe you. I think beyond what your friend experienced, saying like, yeah, I know Kanye said this stuff, but I really like this concert. I think there's that other dimension to things. And I think it's similar. I don't mean to bring it back to this, but I think it's similar with Trump. I mean, Trump himself has said, I could stand on Fifth Avenue, shoot somebody, and my fans would not think any differently of me. So I think that there's that level of like, when it comes to people who have that level of fame and impact, they can get away with certain things. And then again, people are people, and some of those people are in power. So they're the ones making a decision whether or not to admit you or not admit you into a country, whether or not your concert can go on or not go on. So I think all of this stuff is very, very messy. And unfortunately, it boils down to the human condition and what people are willing and aren't willing to believe. And yeah, I wish I had a better answer for it than that, but I think it's unfortunately just messy.
Yeah, it certainly is messy, but I will tell you, it's always great to have you two on the show to help clean up and make sense of all of this mess that we're seeing in the world, you two. This was a really fun little menage we had here, you two. We're going to have to do this again, but I'll think of a better name for it than menage. So I want to thank you both for joining me today. Susie, always an absolute treat. I don't have you enough. Frank, I'm lucky enough to have you once, sometimes twice a week. So I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. Before I let you go, Susie, you're doing God's work out there over in the UK. Where can our audience go to see whatever you're working on currently, where your hot takes are on X? The people want to know, so please tell them.
The best place is on X. Just look up @DecentraSuze.
Love it. Well, Susie, always a treat. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's always a real pleasure. And Frank, you know, you're always doing the thing. You're making the big stories, interviewing the right people, taking the veil behind what's going on and showing people how the world really works. What are you working on right now? And where can our audience go find it, except for when they get the chance to come see you on our show?
That's it. Yeah, I'll be here tomorrow at noon Eastern time too. So join us again. But yeah, one thing I will say, so my X handle as well is just at Frank Corva. But I will say today or tomorrow, I'll be releasing my interview with an Iraqi who has been in touch with many Iranians, and we spent about an hour just breaking down the nuance to the Iran situation, including the ethnic diversity, the diversity of perspectives on the IRGC, on the regime, on people who want freedom, on people who don't necessarily want things to change. And I did it just for the sake of something that feels very nonpartisan, for people to be able to experience a take on Iran that feels quite nuanced and complicated. I think the interviewee actually said, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know where we go from here because I know the situation on the ground too well. So that's New Renaissance Capital is my podcast. You could just Google that. It's YouTube and all the major podcast apps, and that should be out by tomorrow.
Amazing. Well, you're, like I always say, you're reporting on the real stories. So everyone, I encourage you to check that out. And Susie, I just got word you're going to be joining us every other week now. So I'm going to have to come up with a fun stinger for you to have you on. I'm super excited about that. And I was super grateful for this conversation, you two. So I want to thank you so much for your time this Tuesday. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. And Frank, I'll see you tomorrow, buddy.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Hank.
Bye. Bye, Frank. Bye, Susie. Thank you so much. All right, gang, we're going to break here, guys. We're going to break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we got more of this morning's top stories to talk about, so stay tuned. We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. I don't know about you guys, but after that last conversation, I think I need a cigarette because that was a good one. But we got more to talk about on today's show, so let's get back into it. As the biggest pushback to Trump's war posture right now isn't coming from the Democrats, it's coming from his own side of the aisle. Tucker Carlson delivered a sharp and very public break with the administration's approach as he reminded the president that he is not above any other human life, directly challenging both the tone and the moral framing of the conflict.
Who do you think you are? You're tweeting out the F word on Easter morning? You'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. So obviously you're mocking the religion of Iran. Okay. If you seek a religious war, that's a good idea. But by the way, no decent person mocks other people's religions. You may have a problem with the theology. Presumably you do if it's not your religion, and you can explain what that is. But to mock other people's faith is to mock the idea of faith itself. And we should never mock that. Because at its core is the acknowledgement that we are not in charge of the universe. We did not build it. We won't be here at the end of it. We can destroy life. We cannot create it because we are not God.
Now, in case you haven't been paying attention, Tucker Carlson isn't just another commentator. He's the most influential voice in the populist right media ecosystem right now. And Tucker is now framing this war as a moral failure, not a strategic one. And when that message hits the same audience that helped put Trump in office, it changes the political math here. Because losing support at the base level doesn't just create noise, it raises the real cost of going further. And as the conflict between the US, Iran, and Israel intensifies, access to what's actually happening on the ground is getting tighter. Satellite imaging firm Planet Labs announced it will indefinitely withhold imagery of Iran and the surrounding conflict zone at the request of the US government. Now, that effectively removes one of the few widely available tools journalists and independent analysts rely on to verify strikes and assess damages in real time. Some space experts say that Iran may still be accessing commercial imagery through other channels, including adversarial networks. But for the public, visibility just drops significantly. And when access to evidence is limited while decisions are still being made, it shifts who gets to define what's actually happening. Because in situations like this, controlling the images often ends up shaping the story itself. And while politicians are talking tough, the money side of the world is doing something very different. Across global markets, traders are essentially frozen heading into today's Hormuz deadline. Futures are slightly down. Oil keeps climbing with Brent above $111 and WTI past $113. And gas in the U.S. is now sitting at $4.11 nationally after being under $3 before the conflict began. In Europe, Italy has started rationing jet fuel at airports, and several Asian companies are already tightening their energy usage. Singapore's foreign minister said what most traders are already thinking, that markets still aren't fully pricing in the worst-case scenario. And right now, nobody is making big bets in either direction. There's nothing solid to trade on except a deadline and a president who hasn't followed through on previous ones. So instead of reacting, markets are just hovering in place. Not pricing a deal, not pricing a war, just pricing the hours before what feels like a coin flip. And while Washington is trying to isolate Iran, one of its biggest partners just made a very different calculation. India has resumed oil imports from Iran after a 7-year pause, purchasing 44,000 metric tons of LPG loaded on sanctioned vessels. Now, this is the first such deal since U.S. sanctions shut the door back in 2017. But the reality now is pretty simple. India needs energy. Iran has supply. And even the United States has quietly relaxed some of its restrictions to ease global shortages. So the lines are starting to blur here. And in exchange, India says it expects cooperation from Iran to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. That's a direct transactional deal happening in real time. And it shows that when energy security gets tight, even allies start making decisions based less on alignment and more on survival. And just weeks before a massive courtroom showdown, OpenAI is making its first move. The company has sent letters to state attorney generals in California and Delaware asking them to investigate Elon Musk for alleged anti-competitive behavior. You see, OpenAI claims that Musk has been coordinating with Meta's Mark Zuckerberg to undermine its position in the AI market. And this all comes as jury selection for the Musk versus OpenAI lawsuit, where Musk is seeking more than $100 billion in damages. So the timing here isn't exactly random. It's a calculated effort to shape how regulators and potentially jurors view Musk before the trial even begins. And it signals something bigger happening across the AI space. Because this fight isn't just about products anymore. It's about who controls the industry. And now that battle is moving into courtrooms and government offices instead of just code releases. And in the middle of a news cycle that is being dominated by conflict, something very different just happened. You see, out in deep space, NASA's Artemis 2 mission completed a 7-hour flyby of the moon, marking humanity's first return to lunar orbit since 1972. And the crew pushed farther than any humans ever have before, breaking Apollo 13's distance record at 252,756 miles away from Earth. Better than me, right? Now, during a 40-minute communications blackout behind the moon, the crew captured images of terrain features, including impact craters and ancient lava flows. Now, they're heading home with splashdown scheduled off the coast of San Diego for Friday, April 10th. And while most of the world is focused on instability down here, this mission is a reminder that progress is still happening somewhere high above it. And every few months, someone resurfaces with the Bitcoin is going to zero argument, and somehow it always sounds confident, scientific, and completely disconnected from how the system actually works. This time, it's coming out from economist Stephen Keen, who went on the Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett and made the claim outright. He didn't hedge it, he didn't soften it, just said, yes, Bitcoin goes to zero. Take a look.
I wanted to come back to something you actually said earlier. You talked about Bitcoin briefly.
Yeah.
I've heard you say that you think Bitcoin's going to zero.
Yeah.
Okay, this is worrying. I think I have some Bitcoin. You're an economist.
Yeah.
You're saying that Bitcoin is going to zero. Why?
Because ultimately, because of its reliance upon energy. I mean, you know Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert? Have you met them at all?
No.
They were sort of the original proselytizers for Bitcoin, and they're now living in, I think, El Salvador, which has adopted Bitcoin as a form of currency. When they told me about Bitcoin, I could have bought it for £1 of Bitcoin, which I would have been maybe wealthier than you if I'd done that. The reason I didn't was they explained that the way that the public ledger is kept safe is that it takes too much energy to break it. So each transaction requires 10 minutes of computer processing time globally, by the looks of it, to actually create an extra Bitcoin. And that means it's too expensive for somebody to try to break the ledger. That means it's got a huge requirement for energy use. And I believe, knowing what I know from climate scientists, that at some point we're going to realize we're using far too much energy on the planet. We've got to cut the energy consumption. And the two easiest things to cut out to reduce energy consumption are cryptocurrencies and international travel.
Now, Keen's reasoning is built around energy. He argues that Bitcoin consumes too much of it, that society will eventually be forced to cut back, and that things like cryptocurrency and international travel will be among the easiest to eliminate. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a clean argument, kind of, until you actually look at what the energy is doing, because Bitcoin's energy use isn't a bug in the system. It is the system. It's what ties a digital network to physical reality, making it extremely expensive to attack, manipulate, or rewrite. So when people say it uses too much energy, they're skipping the more important question here. The real question isn't how much energy Bitcoin uses, it's what that energy is securing. And in this case, it's a monetary system that doesn't rely on any central authority to function. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because this is where the argument really starts to fall apart. No country in history has ever reached a high standard of living by using less energy. Every society that has reached a high standard of living got there by increasing energy consumption, not reducing it. So the idea that we're going to cut energy use and somehow maintain or improve prosperity doesn't exactly line up with reality. It's a nice theory, but it doesn't survive contact with history. And then there's the expertise problem. You see, climate scientists are incredibly valuable in understanding environmental systems, but that doesn't automatically make them experts in power grids or energy markets or economic trade-offs. Those are entirely different disciplines. Meanwhile, Bitcoin mining is increasingly being deployed in places where energy would otherwise go unused, whether that's stranded natural gas, excess renewable output, or grid balancing scenarios. And that nuance tends to get lost in the broader narrative here. And if you want the less polite version of what's going on, James Lavish probably summed it up best, saying, translated, I could have bought Bitcoin long ago, but I didn't. And now I'm going to fabricate a reason it must fail so I can feel better about missing it. Which might sound harsh, but it explains why these arguments keep coming back, because they're not really about energy, they're about positioning. And for viewers, this is where it matters, okay? This is what mainstream narratives still look like at scale. Millions of people hearing a version of the story that skips over how the system actually works. And if you understand the incentives behind Bitcoin, you're not just reacting to those narratives, you're ahead of them. Organizers for the Wireless Festival, which takes place in London, have canceled the event. And this comes after they announced that Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, would headline all 3 nights this July, marking his first UK booking in 11 years. And the backlash, it was immediate. British Jewish groups called it deeply irresponsible, and sponsors fled, including Pepsi, Diageo, Rockstar, PayPal. They're all out. Ye then released a statement saying he wanted to bring unity, peace, and love to London and offered to meet British Jewish community leaders. Ye's decision to release a song called Heil Hitler and to sell swastika t-shirts had its consequences, though he took out a full-page Wall Street Journal ad apology in January blaming manic episodes from bipolar disorder, and well, the UK didn't accept it. Hours later, the UK Home Office rejected his electronic travel authorization on grounds of his presence would not be conducive to the public good. And the festival was canceled entirely. Now, all tickets will be refunded, by the way. But what's funny about this one okay, is that this isn't Trump, this isn't the first time the UK has banned people or denied entry before. That's actually quite the list. Let me read it to you here. It's pretty funny. So we now have Kanye West. He's the newest addition to the gang, but we also have Lil Wayne, Tyler the Creator, Mike Tyson, the rapper 69, Snoop Dogg, Ja Rule, Chris Brown, Busta Rhymes, and then last, Osama bin Laden. So it's quite the list there of people that aren't allowed into the UK, some maybe for better reasons than others. Either way, Kanye will not be playing in the UK. And after seeing his performances at SoFi, I mourn for you guys. It looked incredible. Either way, that's what's happening. And gang, that is a wrap for today's 3-hour edition of Roxom TV News. Doing a little filling in for Walker America. He's out today, so we took an hour of his time, and hopefully we didn't disappoint. We certainly missed him, and we'll be excited to have him back soon. But in the meantime, I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. If you haven't already, please do the thing. Like, follow, subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV, wherever you choose to do your scrolling. We do our best to bring you the most unbiased signal and media coverage you can get in a world where you can't trust all these legacy juggernauts. So the place you come is right here at Roxom TV News. We're giving it to you straight, so hopefully you can navigate the world a little more informed than you were before the show started. So I want to thank you all for joining. I will be back tomorrow, Wednesday, same time, same place, 8 a.m. PST, right here at Roxom TV, going until 10 a.m. So I hope to see you there. And until then, I hope you all stay safe, stay informed, and have a marvelous Tuesday, my friends. Can't wait to see you Wednesday morning. Have a good one.